They said the city was born from a dream, not a divine vision, but something quieter, almost human. At the edge of the Mediterranean, where the sea shimmered like molten glass, Alexander looked upon an empty stretch of coast and saw eternity. He ordered its design not as a fortress or a throne, but as a pattern, streets carved into logic, harbours shaped to welcome the winds. Alexandria was not meant to conquer the world, it was meant to gather it. When dawn touched its marble walls, the city seemed to rise straight out of the water. Fishermen swore the sea itself bowed to its light. Traders arrived from distant shores, their ships heavy with spices, ivory, scrolls, and whispers. From the deserts came caravans carrying ink-black papyrus. From Greece, philosophers with tongues sharpened by reason. From Babylon and India, maps drawn on memory and faith. They all converged here, where the salt air mingled with parchment and oil, and language itself became a currency. Ptolemy, who inherited Alexander's dream, saw what others could not, that power could be made not of armies, but of ideas. And so he built a sanctuary for thought. Along the city's spine rose the library, a structure so vast and luminous that even the sea seemed to hesitate before its walls. Columns soared like trees, each one engraved with verses that only scholars could read. Within, the air carried a scent both fragile and eternal, ink, smoke, and time. They said the library's shelves stretched endlessly, that one could wander for days and never reach their end. Yet it was not the size that astonished, but the silence. It was a living silence, full of breath and possibility, the hush of 1,000 minds bending toward discovery. Here, men and women copied scrolls until their hands trembled, preserving the wisdom of civilizations that no longer had names. They translated epics from tongues long extinct, charted stars that had died before their birth, and debated truths so delicate they could not survive the noise of ordinary life. Outside its doors, Alexandria pulsed with light. The lighthouse of Pharos, a miracle of stone and fire, guided sailors from miles away, a beacon not just for ships, but for souls seeking direction. Each night, its flame turned upon the sea, and the city below shimmered as though dreaming in its glow. The harbour filled with vessels from every horizon, Egyptian barges heavy with grain, Greek triremes, Phoenician merchants whispering of lost gods. Every arrival brought new knowledge, and with it, new questions. There were no borders here, not of land, not of belief. A mathematician might dine with a poet, a priest with an astronomer. They argued, they laughed, they doubted. The library did not demand agreement. It demanded curiosity. Truth, in Alexandria, was not a possession but a pursuit, and for a brief moment in human history, that pursuit was pure. Yet even in its golden light, shadows gathered. Beyond the marble courtyards, jealousy and fear began to stir. Rome watched with wary eyes. Athens, old and proud, whispered of arrogance. To some, Alexandria's ambition seemed unnatural, a city claiming to hold the world in its hands. But within its walls, the scholars paid no heed. They believed knowledge was immortal, that once preserved, it could never be lost again. At dusk, when the sun melted into the sea, the library's windows burned within a fire. One could imagine the scholars still within figures hunched over parchment, the flicker of lamps tracing halos above their bowed heads. The world outside darkened, but here, thought remained awake. The murmur of quills on papyrus became the city's heartbeat. Even the waves seemed to hush as though afraid to disturb it. There was a quiet arrogance in it. Perhaps this belief that knowledge could be contained, that wisdom could be stored like grain. But there was tenderness too. The librarians wrote as though writing could defy death itself, as if the act of remembering was enough to keep the gods watching. For them, every word was a prayer not to heaven, but to the future. Visitors described Alexandria as both real and impossible. Its streets were too straight, its order too perfect. Some said the city existed halfway between earth and myth, that its foundations rested not only on stone but on intention. To walk its avenues was to feel time bending, the past whispering through the walls, the future waiting in the air. And above it all, the lighthouse watched, its beam sweeping across eternity, guarding the fragile miracle below. But even miracles carry the seed of their end. The more perfect the vision, the more delicate its balance. The library's hunger for knowledge was boundless, so boundless that it reached into every passing ship. Sailors arriving in port were ordered to surrender their books. Each one was copied, and the duplicate returned. Some called it preservation, others called it theft. The boundary between enlightenment and control began to blur. Still, the dream held. Beneath the hum of ambition, the library thrived as a living organism, a network of minds connected by ink and hope. Each scroll added another thread to the great tapestry of understanding. They believed that if they wove long enough, the pattern of the universe itself might reveal its meaning. And perhaps, for a fleeting instant, it did. For in those years, Alexandria became something the world had never seen. Not merely a city, but a reflection of the human mind itself. Vast, flawed, luminous, and endlessly reaching. The sea whispered at its edge, as though repeating the city's own secret, that all things, no matter how magnificent, are made of the same fragile salt and dust. But for now, Alexandria stood untouched, radiant in the dawn of its own creation, a miracle carved from water and will. It was a city built not for power or glory, but to capture every thought the world had ever dreamed. And somewhere in the stillness of its marble halls, the first keeper of the flame dipped his pen in ink, unaware that he was not merely writing words, but history itself. The dream had begun. The question now was, who would keep it alive? The library did not hum, it breathed. Its silence was not the absence of sound, but the presence of thousands of thoughts suspended in air, as if the walls themselves were listening. Light filtered through high windows and settled softly on the marble floors, illuminating dust that moved like slow snow. Between towering shelves, scribes bent over their tables, their fingers stained with ink, their faces caught in the half-glow of oil lamps. Each carried a fragment of eternity in their hands, a strip of papyrus, a curl of parchment, a memory translated from one dying tongue to another. To step inside was to feel the pulse of the ancient world beating beneath your feet. There were scrolls from Greece, from Persia, from the farthest edges of lands whose names had already faded. Some came rolled in silk, others cracked and brittle from the desert wind. A scribe would lift one, uncoil it carefully, and begin the ritual that had become their faith copying, word by word, line by line, as though the act itself could stop time. The sound of reed pens brushing papyrus filled the air like distant rain. Callimachus, the librarian poet, moved quietly through the aisles, a man both scholar and sentinel. His eyes were weary, but his devotion was absolute. He was said to know the position of every scroll, the lineage of every author, the subject of every word ever stored there. He devised the first great catalogue, the Pinaques, a map of knowledge written on scrolls about scrolls, an index to order the chaos of human thought. To those who came after, it would seem impossible. But to Callimachus, it was duty not to know everything, but to make knowing possible. Near him worked Eratosthenes, a man who measured the earth by shadows. On a midsummer day, when the sun stood directly above Syene, he noted that a well there reflected no shadow at all. In Alexandria, he placed a stick in the ground and measured the angle of its shade. With nothing but geometry and curiosity, he calculated the planet's circumference and came so close to truth that later ages would marvel at the precision. He laughed when his peers called him a dreamer. "We all are," he said, "but some of us remember to measure the dream." And in the halls of medicine, Herophilus traced the pathways of the human body with trembling reverence. He was among the first to study anatomy openly, dissecting not animals but people, the condemned, the forgotten. To him, the human form was a temple of mysteries, its veins rivers of meaning. His notes would one day vanish like smoke, but for now, his discoveries glimmered like candlelight against the dark of ignorance. The library gathered them all, astronomers charting invisible spheres, philosophers arguing over the weight of souls, poets trying to trap truth in words. They came from across the known world, speaking in accents that bent and blurred into a single language of devotion. For them, this place was not simply a building. It was the body of humanity's memory. To care for it was to serve the divine, not the gods of marble and myth, but the god of thought itself. Yet within their reverence lay a quiet fear. Beneath the polished marble, beneath the order and discipline, they felt the trembling of something fragile. Each scroll, so easily burned or lost, carried a world entire, and each world could vanish with a careless hand or a single spark. They built eternity out of papyrus, and prayed that the sea would not find it. The scribes did not speak of it openly, but in their long hours of work, the thought lingered like the taste of smoke. What if the memory of the world was too delicate to survive the weight of time? Some nights, a scribe would pause, brush the dust from a finished copy, and listen to the faint creak of the shelves. The sound seemed alive, like trees in wind. Outside, waves lapped against the harbour walls, and the lighthouse turned its slow beam across the dark. The city was safe, they told themselves. The library, eternal. But still, they worked faster as if racing against something unseen. The scholars spoke often of perfection, but they also knew that perfection demanded sacrifice. To keep knowledge pure, it had to be rewritten constantly. The papyrus aged, the ink faded, the air itself consumed what they preserved. So they copied endlessly, not out of vanity, but necessity. Each generation of scribes preserved the past by erasing their own present. Their names rarely recorded, their labour anonymous. Their reward was not remembrance, but the quiet certainty that their hands had touched something greater than themselves. There were rituals within the library that no outsider ever saw. In the scriptorium at dawn, they greeted the rising sun with silence, turning toward the east as the light spilled through latticed windows. To them, dawn was sacred, the renewal of vision. Every scroll unrolled beneath that light became a resurrection. And when night fell, they extinguished the lamps one by one, whispering the last lines they had copied, as if tucking the words into sleep. Visitors who entered often described a strange sensation that time slowed, or perhaps folded. Conversations drifted like mist between rooms. Scholars passed one another like ghosts, each lost in his own labyrinth of thought. It was said that to spend too long in the library was to forget where you were, or even who you were. There were stories of men who came seeking a single fact and never left, consumed by the need to understand everything. The library did not imprison them, it merely invited them never to leave. And in the quiet corners, even the greatest minds carried their doubts. Eratosthenes once wrote that every calculation was a guess against eternity. Herophilus, after years of study, confessed that the more he saw, the less he understood. Knowledge expanded like the sea, beautiful, vast and merciless. For every question answered, 100 more appeared, each deeper and darker than the last. The scholars began to suspect that their pursuit might never end, that the library's true lesson was not mastery, but humility. At dusk, Callimachus would walk alone through the colonnades, tracing his fingers along the cool marble. He had catalogued the world, and yet the world still eluded him. Perhaps, he mused, the gods keep their secrets not to mock us, but to protect us. In his later years, he wrote poems instead of lists, quiet verses about light and loss, about the fragility of understanding. Few survive today, but the rumour of his melancholy does. There were others, too, who questioned the library's growing power. Some whispered that knowledge itself could become a kind of tyranny, that whoever controlled the written word could shape the world. There were accusations that scrolls were confiscated from ships, copied without permission, claimed as property of the Ptolemies. Not all knowledge entered willingly. But within those walls, intent blurred into necessity. The keepers believed they were saving the world, even if it meant taking it apart. Outside, the city thrived markets loud with barter, scholars reciting epics in courtyards fragrant with myrrh. But the library remained the city's quiet heart. To the people of Alexandria, it was more than a building. It was a promise that civilization could outlast chaos. To the scholars within, it was a fragile flame, flickering against the dark. One stormy night, lightning struck near the harbour, and the echo rolled across the city like a warning. The next morning, the scribes found water seeping through cracks in the roof. They hurried to lift the lower shelves, drying scrolls in the weak Sunday. No fire had come, no disaster, and yet the fear clung to them. They realized how little it would take a single ember, a careless soldier, a gust of wind to undo all that had been built. In their eyes, the library was not invincible. It was mortal. Still, they carried on. They bound the damp scrolls in linen, whispered prayers to Thoth, god of writing, and returned to work. That was their defiance, not to shout against oblivion, but to continue copying in silence. Day after day, year after year, hand after hand, they traced the same letters into being, knowing that one day even those letters would fade. And yet, Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the miracle was not that knowledge survived, but that it was loved enough to be rewritten again and again, each time as if for the first. The keepers did not hope for immortality. They hoped only that someone, somewhere, in another age, might find their words and remember that once, here by the sea, the human spirit refused to give in to forgetting. As the lamps flickered and the tide whispered against the harbour, the library seemed to breathe again, patient, luminous, unaware of the shadow approaching. Beyond the horizon the world was changing, new empires rising, old loyalties shifting. The flame still burned, steady and pure, but even the brightest light casts a shadow. For now, the keepers worked on, their pens moving like prayer. But soon, forces greater than devotion would test what no ink could preserve. The storm of empire was coming, and the flame they guarded would be forced to face the wind. The dream ended not with thunder, but with the crackle of flame. For centuries, Alexandria had been a sanctuary of peace, a city of thought, unbothered by the noise of conquest. But peace, like parchment, is easily torn. Beyond the white columns of the library, empires stirred, each hungering for the world's edge. The same seas that had once carried scrolls and scholars now brought soldiers and steel. And in the end, it was not hatred that set the fire, but ambition. They said it began in the harbour, that ancient theatre of arrivals and departures. The air that once smelled of salt and ink now reeked of smoke and oil. Julius Caesar, trapped within the city walls during his Alexandrian campaign, had ordered the enemy fleet burned to prevent pursuit. The fire took to the masts first great wooden skeletons erupting into light, their reflections trembling on the water like dying stars. The wind rose, carrying embers inland. It was a small thing, they said, a tactical decision, a moment's necessity. But in a city built of parchment and papyrus, no spark was small. Flames do not respect intentions. The people of Alexandria awoke to the sound of crackling wood and the distant roar of the harbour. From the docks, the smoke could be seen curling upward, drifting toward the royal quarter. Whether it reached the library, no one can say with certainty. Some claim to have seen scrolls falling from the sky like birds with burning wings. Others swore the fire never crossed the palace walls. The truth, like ash, scattered in the wind. Strabo, who lived later, wrote that only the warehouses holding the library's copies were lost repositories of scrolls awaiting cataloguing. Plutarch believed the great collection itself had perished. Dio Cassius, centuries afterward, dismissed both accounts as exaggeration. Each chronicler, standing at the edge of memory, could only reach for smoke. The library, which had preserved so much certainty, became itself a mystery. And perhaps that is fitting. The greatest repositories of truth often vanish in uncertainty, as though the universe refuses to let knowledge rest too long in human hands. In the courtyards, scholars gathered beneath a red sky, watching the glow spread across the harbour. Some prayed, some fled, others returned to their tables, copying as if their quills could outpace the fire. The air filled with embers, tiny, luminous fragments of a world trying to endure. For them, the loss was not only of books, but of belief, that knowledge could protect itself from power. Yet even in the heart of catastrophe, there was ambiguity. Many scrolls survived, carried into smaller libraries and private collections throughout the city. The daughter institution, the Serapeum, stood untouched for centuries more. Perhaps the main library's core endured too, its shelves blackened but not destroyed. Alexandria, after all, had faced storms before. Its flame, once kindled, did not surrender easily. But the damage was deeper than fire. War had entered the city's rhythm, and war does not forget where it has been. Rome's presence lingered long after the smoke cleared. Soldiers filled the streets that once echoed with debate. The library, even if it survived, was no longer the same. The spirit of quiet devotion had been replaced by caution. Scholars who once sought truth now measured their words against politics. The scriptorium's silence became heavier, tinged with fear. There were stories whispered later of scribes salvaging scrolls from the ashes, drying them under what remained of the Pharos light. Of librarians risking their lives to save texts older than any empire. Some said they worked for weeks, rescuing thousands. Others said it was hopeless from the start. But even in the darkest retellings, there lingers an image of persistence, blackened hands cradling words that refuse to die. The library's fate became a riddle told through centuries, each age adding its own verse. To some it was a tragedy the moment humanity lost its innocence. To others, it was an inevitability, knowledge returning to dust, as all things must. But to those who understand the rhythm of history, it was something else entirely: transformation. The library may have burned, but its spirit scattered like seeds. The loss was not an ending, but a beginning, a dispersal of wisdom across the world. Even the flames, in their way, were disciples. They carried the essence of Alexandria beyond its walls, fragments of geometry to Athens, philosophy to Rome, medicine to Byzantium. What could not be preserved in parchment was preserved in memory. The scholars who escaped became pilgrims of knowledge, carrying what they could recall. From their recollections, later civilizations would rebuild. The fire that devoured Alexandria became, paradoxically, the light that guided those who followed. Still, something irreplaceable was gone. The great hall where Eratosthenes had measured the earth was silent. The catalogues of Callimachus, that vast map of human thought, lost. The debates that once echoed under vaulted ceilings vanished into rumour. What remained was the echo, faint, lingering, impossible to silence. Even centuries later, travellers who stood among the ruins claimed they could still feel it, a presence in the air, as if the city itself remembered what it had lost. And yet, there was beauty in the ambiguity. The library's destruction was never recorded in certainty. No one witnessed its final breath. This, too, became part of its mythology, that something so perfect could not die in a single night. Perhaps the fire consumed only a fragment. Perhaps the true library, the one built in minds and memory, never burned at all. For those who came after, Alexandria's fall was both warning and invitation. It reminded them that knowledge, though fragile, always finds new forms. Stone can crumble, scrolls can burn, but the act of remembering endures. Each generation, in its own way, rebuilds the library in ink, in print, in code. The dream that began beside the sea continues wherever curiosity survives. Some say Caesar wept when he realized what had been lost. Others say he never noticed. History is merciless that way. It rarely pauses to mourn what it destroys. But perhaps the library's end was not in the harbour's flames, nor in any man's command. Perhaps it began the moment humanity believed knowledge could be contained. For what we try hardest to preserve is often what time most insists on changing. As the fire dimmed, the city exhaled. The water reflected the glow like molten gold, and the smoke drifted out to sea, carrying with it the ghosts of words no one would ever read again. Alexandria would rebuild it, always did, but something intangible had shifted. The dream of perfect preservation was gone. And in that space of loss, something softer took root, the understanding that even ashes hold meaning. For every word lost, another waited to be written. The scholars who survived would teach again, would rebuild their shelves, would whisper their stories into a future that might never know their names. Some say it burned by accident, others say it was destiny. But perhaps the library was never meant to die quietly. Perhaps, like all miracles, it had to fall so that it could echo, not in walls or parchment, but in the human longing to know. And as the embers cooled and the smoke faded into silence, the whisper remained faint but unbroken, rising from the ruins like breath returning to the body. The dream had changed shape, but it still lived. Soon, the fires would pass, leaving only ashes, and in those ashes something would stir. The next story belongs to what endured. When the flames finally slept, Alexandria awoke to silence. The sea still breathed, the gulls still circled above the harbour, but the rhythm of the city had changed. The air carried a faint sweetness, the scent of burned papyrus mixed with salt. In the courtyards, where scholars once debated, ashes drifted like grey snow, settling over marble floors that had once shone with reflected light. The library, or what remained of it, stood like a hollowed shell, its colonnades cracked, its vast halls echoing with absence. No one could agree on what had been lost. Some said 40,000 scrolls, others swore the number was closer to 500,000. But numbers could not measure what had vanished. Knowledge is not counted, it is felt. The loss pressed against the air, heavy and invisible, like the grief after a long illness. For generations, the library had been the heart of a world that believed understanding could outlast mortality. Now that heart had stopped, and yet something within the ruins still pulsed. The survivors came quietly, their sandals leaving ghostly tracks through soot. They did not speak. To speak would have been to admit the end. Instead, they searched among the embers for fragments, half-burned pages, melted wax tablets, the faint impressions of letters scorched into wood. A few scrolls, blackened but legible, were carried out and placed beneath the sundae. When touched, the papyrus flaked away, releasing small clouds of dust, words dissolving back into the air from which they had once been drawn. But even as the scholars mourned, they began to realize something profound. Not everything had died. A handful of texts had already escaped copies sent to Rhodes, Athens, Antioch. Others lived within memory, recited so often that they had become part of their keeper's breath. What the fire consumed, the mind preserved. Eratosthenes' measurements of the earth still lived in travellers' retellings. Herophilus's insights on anatomy survived in the notes of students scattered across the Mediterranean. The library had been wounded, but not silenced. History often confuses destruction with disappearance. But in truth, the end of one vessel is only the migration of its contents. The library did not die in the fire, it changed form. Its spirit drifted eastward, carried by traders, scholars, and pilgrims who refused to let forgetting win. The flames that blackened Alexandria became the embers that lit Byzantium, Persia, and centuries later, Baghdad. Knowledge, like smoke, rose from ruin and found new air to breathe. Imagine the scene years later. A scholar in Constantinople, unrolling a scroll copied by an ancestor from Alexandria, tracing faded letters by candlelight. He knows the hand that wrote them is long dead, the city that birthed them turned to legend. Yet the words endure, their meaning alive in a language that has changed but not forgotten. He reads not merely to learn, but to remember. Every syllable is an act of defiance, a small resurrection of what the fire tried to erase. In this way, Alexandria became not a place, but a current invisible, unending. Its fragments wove through the veins of empires. When Byzantium rose, it inherited not just Rome's crown, but the last echoes of Egypt's dream. In its monasteries and scriptoria, monks copied texts, thought extinct, preserving Greek philosophy beside Christian hymns. To them, the words of Plato and Aristotle were not heresy, but harmony, another voice in the great conversation of the divine. The flame that once threatened to destroy knowledge now warmed the hands of those who kept it alive. Further east, in Persia, the scholars of Jundishapur built a sanctuary of their own, a school of medicine and philosophy said to draw directly from Alexandria's ashes. There, the writings of Herophilus and Hippocrates were studied anew, merged with the teachings of India and the mathematics of Babylon. Knowledge was no longer bound by empire or creed. It flowed like water, seeking new channels when old ones closed. And from Persia, that stream flowed onward, carried by translators and visionaries who believed that learning was the closest thing to immortality. Centuries passed, and the whisper reached Baghdad. There, under the Abbasid caliphs, a new library rose, not of marble and column, but of paper and ink. The Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, became Alexandria's spiritual heir. Scholars of every faith worked side by side, translating lost Greek texts into Arabic, refining them, expanding them. Euclid, Galen, Archimedes' voices once thought extinguished spoke again through new tongues. What had burned in Egypt was reborn beside the Tigris. It is said that when the translators finished a scroll, they would place it beside a basin of water and wait for dawn. As the first light touched the parchment, they would recite the opening lines aloud, believing that every word reborn in another language earned its place in eternity. They did not copy for kings or gold, but for the same reason the Alexandrians once had to keep the world awake. Thus, the fire's legacy was paradoxical. The same flames that devoured knowledge gave it wings. What had been centralized and fragile became scattered and enduring. A single library could burn, a network of memory could not. The library's destruction taught the world that preservation must live not in stone or shelf, but in minds that wander and share. In losing Alexandria, humanity learned how to carry knowledge within itself. Still, the wound never fully healed. For centuries, poets mourned the loss as though it were a person. They wrote of the library as a woman cloaked in smoke, her voice forever whispering from beneath the sea. Sailors swore that on quiet nights near the Alexandrian coast, they could hear her sigh, a long exhale of pages turning beneath the waves. And in that sound, they imagined not sorrow but persistence, a reminder that what burns can also illuminate. Even the ruins became a place of pilgrimage. Travellers came to stand where the library once stood, brushing their fingers across blackened stone, trying to feel the echo of what had been. Some claimed that if you listened closely, you could still hear the faint scratching of pens, ghosts of scribes continuing their work, long after time had moved on. Others said the library was not gone at all, merely invisible, folded into another layer of the world, waiting for the worthy to find it. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere between myth and memory. The library was never meant to be eternal. It was meant to inspire eternity. Its ashes became symbols not of failure, but of continuity. In the charred remains of papyrus, humanity saw its reflection, fragile, flawed, yet endlessly capable of renewal. The fire had not erased meaning, it had revealed it. And so, across the centuries, the whisper persisted in monasteries where monks worked by candlelight, in desert tents where scholars debated beneath the stars, in hidden rooms where translators risked their lives to preserve forbidden texts. Each act of remembrance was a spark. Each spark carried the same unspoken vow: never again shall knowledge be caged by empire or flame. It is tempting to imagine that the library's destruction was a tragedy of chance, but perhaps it was destiny, not the death of an ideal, but its transformation. The flame that once consumed scrolls became the light that guided future seekers. Alexandria's true legacy was not the walls that fell, but the minds it awakened, the minds that refused to let silence have the last word. Even now, when we open a book, we echo that ancient ritual. Every page turned is a gesture of resurrection. Every line read aloud reclaims something once lost to smoke. The library lives wherever curiosity breathes, in a classroom, a study, a whispered story before sleep. What if fire was not the end, but the beginning of another kind of library, one written not in ink, but in remembrance? As the centuries rolled on, the ashes settled, but the whisper never stopped. It drifted through Byzantium's gilded halls, across Persia's deserts, into Baghdad's golden domes. The dream had changed form again, unseen but alive. And if you listen closely, even now, perhaps you can hear it, that faint murmur rising from the ruins of time, the sound of human hands still reaching for what they can never fully hold. The smoke fades, the embers cool, but the story continues, not in fire, but in the echoes it left behind. The library fell, but its words refused to die. Long after the smoke of Alexandria thinned into the sea breeze, the survivors began to walk. They did not wear crowns or carry banners. They carried scrolls wrapped in linen, ink-stained fingers trembling from exhaustion. Some hid their treasures beneath cloaks, others recited them aloud until the words became memory. These were not conquerors, but pilgrims, wanderers of wisdom, and the desert was their cathedral. What fire could not keep, they carried in silence. They scattered in every direction. North to the Aegean, east through the valleys of the Levant, south along the Nile, where temples whispered the older language of gods. They found refuge not in fortresses, but in monasteries, caravanserais, and open markets where strangers spoke in tongues that braided and split like rivers. In their travels, the memory of Alexandria began to transform no longer a place but a pulse. The dream of one great library became many smaller ones, hidden behind monastery walls or stored in travellers' minds. Knowledge was exiled, but it was not lost. Along the caravan routes, papyrus gave way to parchment, parchment to paper lighter, more durable, easier to conceal. Copyists in Syria, scribes in Antioch, translators in Edessa all joined the same invisible mission: to rewrite what time and empire had tried to erase. They did not think of themselves as saviors. They were merely continuing a rhythm older than any kingdom, the rhythm of preservation through change. When they reached Persia, they found new listeners. The Sassanid kings, lovers of both science and story, welcomed the refugees of learning. The scholars were given rooms in the city of Jundashapur, where medicine, mathematics, and philosophy converged like threads in a tapestry. There, for the first time, the languages of Greece, India, and Babylon shared the same breath. A Greek physician might debate with a Persian astronomer. A Hindu mathematician might draw circles beside a Nestorian priest. And between them all moved the ghost of Alexandria, not as memory, but as method. To ask, to compare, to seek without fear. In time, their ideas crossed yet another frontier into the heart of the Islamic world. When the Abbasid caliphs rose in Baghdad, they inherited more than power, they inherited curiosity. The caliphs dreamed of a city where knowledge could be translated into eternity. So they built one. Its walls gleamed with white stone, its courtyards glowed beneath hanging lamps. They called it Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. If Alexandria had been the cradle of learning, Baghdad was its rebirth. Here, the wanderers found a home again. They unpacked their satchels of salvaged scrolls, their fading memories of forgotten tongues. Within these walls, the old knowledge of Greece met the new brilliance of the Arab world. Translators, poets, and scientists worked together by candlelight, their tables cluttered with manuscripts in every alphabet imaginable. Each translation was an act of resurrection. Greek became Syriac, Syriac became Arabic. Aristotle's logic found new clarity in the hands of Al-Farabi. Ptolemy's stars were recalculated by Al-Battani. Archimedes' equations re-emerged, carried on the edge of Arabic numerals that would one day return westward as our own. The wanderers had not merely preserved knowledge, they had transformed it. Through their work, the fragments of Alexandria became something vaster, a conversation that stretched across continents and centuries. To walk through Baghdad in its golden age was to feel that same quiet hum that once filled the library by the sea. The scholars gathered beneath domed ceilings to debate medicine, geometry, and philosophy. Paper merchants lined the streets, selling sheets so fine they were said to flutter like moth wings. The Tigris reflected lamplight like a mirror of the stars. And within this city, the dream of universal knowledge was reborn not as a single archive, but as a living, breathing network of minds. But the transformation came with paradox. For every truth preserved, something was changed. Translation is never perfect. It is a kind of rebirth, and every rebirth demands a loss. Words that once belonged to one age began to speak in the accents of another. The Greek psyche became the Arabic nafs, the soul, remade. Meanings shifted, interpretations deepened. But within those changes lay survival. To live, knowledge had to evolve. The scholars understood this. They did not mourn what was altered, for they saw continuity as more sacred than precision. What mattered was that the flame endured even if its colour changed. In their eyes, truth was not a monument but a traveller, walking endlessly from one language to the next. And with every crossing, it learned something new about itself. In the House of Wisdom, the ghost of the library took on new forms. Geometry was reborn as intricate mosaics that turned numbers into beauty. Astronomy became architecture domes, and minarets aligned with stars. Medicine blended philosophy with observation, restoring the sacred bond between body and cosmos. The scholars did not separate science from spirit. They saw both as languages of the same pursuit, to understand creation. And yet, beneath the brilliance, there lingered a faint echo of fragility, the same awareness that had haunted the scribes of Alexandria. They knew that no empire, however enlightened, could escape time's erosion. The shelves might one day fall silent again, but unlike their predecessors, they did not fear the possibility, for they had learned the lesson of fire, that destruction was also distribution. As long as knowledge moved, it could not die. So, they trained students. They sent copies westward, across deserts and seas. The manuscripts reached Spain, Sicily, and North Africa. There, new translators rendered them into Latin, the language of medieval Europe. Once again, the current flowed this time back toward the lands that had once sent wisdom east. It was a cycle, not a straight line. Knowledge, travelling the world like a migrating bird, returning always to new nests. Centuries later, in dimly lit European monasteries, monks would unroll Arabic texts and rediscover what their ancestors had forgotten. They would marvel at the logic of Aristotle, the geometry of Euclid, the medicine of Galen, not realizing that these were echoes of echoes, the wanderer's gifts returning home. When they spoke of the revival of learning, they were naming what had never truly died. The Library of Alexandria had fallen, but its soul had become immortal. It no longer lived in stone halls or gilded shelves, but in the fragile persistence of translation. Every word rewritten carried the memory of the last, every scholar's voice carrying the undertone of the lost sea. The wanderers of wisdom had proven that the greatest monuments are not built of marble, but of minds. Even now, when we read the philosophers of Greece, or the scientists of the Islamic Golden Age, we are hearing that same whisper that began in Alexandria passed from hand to hand, century to century. The library did not burn. It transformed into 1,000 tongues, 1,000 dreams, all bound by the same pulse of human curiosity. The wanderers carried more than knowledge. They carried the question that still haunts us. Can light truly be contained? For light, once freed, does not stay where it is placed. It slips through cracks, hides in language, waits in silence until someone else strikes the spark again. And so the story of the library continues not in ruins or relics, but in the living hands of those who keep searching for the next reflection. Beneath the sea lies a library that never stopped dreaming. The waves above Alexandria's coast move like breathing, glass calm, reflective, concealing what no one has ever truly seen. Divers descend where sunlight fades into green silence, carrying lamps that flicker like small suns. Below them, the ancient world sleeps. Columns lean at impossible angles, carved stones rest half-buried in silt, and statues serene and blind gaze upward through centuries of salt and shadow. Somewhere under this shifting seabed, the memory of the library waits, patient and half awake. The city above is noisy, crowded, alive with horns and voices, but under the harbour, time is slower, denser. Each ripple of sand uncovers something older, a fragment of wall, a corroded tablet, a broken lintel etched with Greek letters no one has read in 2,000 years. The divers move carefully, brushing sediment with their gloves, aware that even a breath can disturb what the water has preserved. They are archaeologists, scientists, but also dreamers, heirs of the same impulse that once filled the library's halls, the need to find what was lost. Their equipment hums softly in the background, sonar scanners mapping the seafloor with invisible waves. On their monitors, faint outlines emerge, corridors that lead nowhere, foundations swallowed by the seabed. Some say these are remnants of the royal quarter, the palaces of Cleopatra, the temples of Isis and Serapis. But there are whispers among scholars, quiet and persistent, that part of the library may have stood nearby. That somewhere in this sunken landscape lies the threshold of the greatest mind humanity ever built. The evidence is scattered, elusive, like fragments of a dream remembered upon waking. Ancient writers spoke of annexes, satellite libraries, secret vaults that housed duplicates of the main collection. Some were built close to the harbour, where scrolls arrived by ship. If those structures fell during earthquakes, and Alexandria endured many, then their remains might now rest beneath these waters. The divers know this, though they rarely say it aloud. To name the hope too clearly is to risk breaking it. As the underwater lamps sweep across the ruins, shapes flicker into view, steps that descend into nothing. A fallen obelisk coated in coral, statues of gods whose names have changed too many times to count. The silence here feels alive, almost listening. It is said that sound travels farther underwater, that voices linger longer. If that is true, then perhaps the echoes of the library's scribes, the scratch of quills, the murmur of thought still drift through this submerged cathedral, carried in the currents. For every discovery, there is uncertainty. Some archaeologists argue that the library's true location lies elsewhere, deep beneath the modern city, under layers of concrete and history. Others believe it was never a single building, but a complex scattered chambers linked by corridors and courtyards. The debate continues, endless and unresolved, like the sea itself. The truth, it seems, hides behind the same veil that has always protected the library: ambiguity. Yet perhaps that is the point. Maybe the library was never meant to be found whole. Maybe its beauty lies in what remains just out of reach, visible enough to haunt, but distant enough to dream about. Like memory itself, it survives in fragments, in impressions that shift as we approach them. We see what we hope to find, and the deeper we dig, the more the line blurs between discovery and imagination. Sometimes, when the divers rise to the surface, they describe strange sensations. They say the water grows warmer near certain ruins, as though the earth remembers its own fire. They hear faint vibrations, mechanical hums that fade when they turn off their gear. Scientists explain it as current or resonance, but others wonder if it is the echo of what once was the ghost of light, the residue of thought. Above the harbour, archaeologists gather in small labs lit by weak bulbs. They clean the recovered fragments with soft brushes, cataloguing every shard. A piece of marble becomes an event, a carved letter, a clue. On one slab, someone finds a faint engraving, a scroll tied with ribbon, barely visible. it might be nothing. Or it might be a symbol left by one of the library's last keepers. A farewell carved before the city fell. The mind, eager for meaning, stitches stories into the gaps. But then again, isn't that what the library always encouraged, the act of imagining what could be true? The more the explorers uncover, the greater the mystery becomes. They find evidence of layers upon layers, Roman masonry atop Greek foundations, Greek ruins upon older Egyptian stone, civilizations stacked like palimpsest. Beneath every age lies another, and beneath that, another still. Alexandria is not just a city, it is a memory made solid. And somewhere at its core, beneath the silt, the sediment, the centuries, rests a question. How much of what we seek is real, and how much do we invent to keep hope alive? In quiet moments, the narrator of time seems to pause, listening. You can almost feel it, the pulse of the forgotten world beneath your feet, the thrum of history that never stops speaking. It is not a voice, but a vibration, like a deep note resonating through stone. It asks nothing. It only exists, waiting for the right listener. The divers continue their work, patient and reverent. Each descent feels like a pilgrimage. They follow the sonar lines through the murk, guided by the faint glow of their headlamps. Sometimes they find relics. A small bust of Ptolemy, its face worn smooth by the sea. A fragment of mosaic tile depicting an open scroll. They lift them carefully, as though touching a heartbeat. Every artifact recovered is a word rescued from drowning. But most of the library remains unseen. A shadow in the water, a possibility beneath the seabed. Perhaps it will never be found. Perhaps it doesn't need to be. Because even in its absence, it continues to shape us. Every theory, every excavation, every artist's rendering of what it might have looked like, all of it proves that the library is still alive, not in structure, but in imagination. We build it again each time we remember. The sea above Alexandria is both grave and guardian. It keeps what it has taken, but it also protects it from time's harsher erasures. The silt conceals and preserves. The salt devours but also embalms. In this paradox, the library survives neither destroyed nor saved, suspended in eternity. Like a memory too precious to confront directly, it hides just beyond reach, whispering through the water. The divers say that when the sun sets, the harbour glows differently. The surface catches light in long golden streaks, and for a moment the sea looks like glass over flame. They imagine that beneath that glow, the old library stirs its columns, catching the reflection of modern light. Its silent rooms filling once more with colour. The dream persists, not because it is proven, but because it is needed. Every civilization, in its own way, searches for what Alexandria lost. We dig, we map, we measure, not just to recover history, but to reclaim faith in continuity. The library beneath our feet is not only a ruin, it is a mirror. When we peer into it, we glimpse ourselves, the endless seekers, the fragile archivists of time. And perhaps this is what the divers feel most strongly when they rise back into daylight, that what they touched in the dark was not stone, but memory. That the ruins below are less a place and more an idea. That knowledge never truly sinks, it only waits to be rediscovered. The camera of the mind pulls back now out of the water, past the shimmering harbour, above the living city built atop its ancient bones. The sea breathes again, covering the ruins as it always has, soft and indifferent. Somewhere beneath those waves, marble eyes still stare upward, waiting for light. The physical search fades, but the question remains, what is it we are really trying to find? The library? The truth? Or perhaps just proof that what we create can outlast our forgetting? Whatever the answer, the divers return to the surface, leaving ripples that vanish as quickly as they came. The sea closes over them like a page being turned. The story continues, not in excavation, but in reflection. The physical search has ended, for now. But another kind of search begins one far deeper. The search for meaning, for the invisible library that lives within us all. We built new libraries, taller than temples, but their shelves are invisible. The dream of Alexandria never truly ended. It only changed its shape, finding new vessels as the centuries turned. What began as scrolls and papyrus became parchment, then print, then code. Each age believed it had finally captured everything the human mind could imagine, a perfect archive of existence. And yet, Each time, the more knowledge we gathered, the less we seemed to understand. The Enlightenment was perhaps Alexandria reborn, a second dawn for the idea that truth could be organized. Across Europe, candlelit rooms filled with philosophers, scholars, and dreamers who spoke as if certainty could be mapped. Encyclopedists like Diderot and D'Alembert set out to gather every known fact into a single book. It was a sacred pursuit disguised as reason. The printing press became their pharos, a lighthouse not of flame, but of ink. The world could finally read itself. In Paris, in Edinburgh, in London, vast rooms overflowed with books, their spines gleaming like jewels. The encyclopedias they produced were not merely collections of facts, they were testaments to belief. Belief that humanity, through order and categorization, could understand the totality of existence. Every subject, from anatomy to astronomy, was assigned its place. Every concept was indexed, cross-referenced, disciplined. The Library of Alexandria had dreamed of gathering all knowledge beneath one roof. Now, the Enlightenment dreamt of fitting it between two covers. But even as the dream expanded, cracks began to show. The more information was catalogued, the more humanity realized how little it truly knew. The boundaries of knowledge receded faster than they could be written down. The map was growing faster than the world it described. For every question answered, 10 more appeared, a paradox that haunted even the most devoted scholars. In dusty studies, thinkers began to confess an unsettling thought, that the pursuit of total knowledge might be impossible, or worse, meaningless. The closer one came to understanding everything, the more the whole dissolved into fragments. Knowledge, they realized, was not a pyramid built upward toward truth, but a horizon that retreated with every step. And yet the impulse continued. By the 19th century, libraries had become cathedrals of paper. The British Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale, the Library of Congress, each was a monument to the same desire, to contain the infinite. Catalogues thickened, classification systems multiplied, and shelves stretched beyond sight. Visitors wandered through aisles like pilgrims, surrounded by millions of pages humming with silent potential. It was beautiful and strangely lonely, because to stand in such a place was to realize how easily meaning drowned in abundance. A single mind could no longer hold even a fraction of what had been recorded. Scholars began to depend on systems, rather than memory indexes, references, summaries. Knowledge was no longer intimate. It had become architecture. Then came the 20th century, and with it, a revolution that made even the grandest libraries look small. Information, once bound to paper, escaped into electricity. The telegraph sent words through wire. The radio sent them through air. Computers arrived, humming like mechanical monks, translating thought into numbers. And with the birth of the internet, the old dream of Alexandria surged back to life with digital wings. Once again, humanity tried to build the map of everything, this time not in stone or ink, but in light. Servers replaced scrolls, search engines replaced scribes. The library's columns became data centers, towering silently on the edges of cities, glowing in blue light. Knowledge could now travel faster than memory itself. Every discovery was instantly recorded, copied, and shared. Humanity had, at last, achieved what the ancients only imagined: universal access. But as the world moved online, something ancient stirred the same paradox that had haunted Alexandria. The more we could access, the less we seemed to know. Information multiplied faster than understanding. Truth became infinite, and therefore invisible. The internet was not a library of wisdom, but of echoes. Every voice spoke at once. Every fact was surrounded by its contradiction. The dream of total knowledge had become a mirror maze. Scrolls had once been fragile, their ink dissolving in the sea air. Now, knowledge itself evaporated, drowned not by fire, but by excess. Algorithms sorted, ranked, and rearranged the chaos, deciding what we should see, what we should forget. The new librarians were machines, and their motives, unlike those of the scribes of Alexandria, were not faith or curiosity, but prediction. The library no longer sought to preserve, it sought to anticipate. And yet, somewhere in the digital fog, the ghost of the old library still lingers. Every time a search begins, it is as though the ancient torch of Pharos flickers once more. The questions are the same, only the language has changed. Instead of papyrus, we scroll through light. Instead of ink, we read pixels. But the longing is identical: to know, to remember, to make sense of the endless. Imagine a modern scholar not in a marble hall, but at a screen glowing in the dark. He searches for a fragment of a lost text, a name half remembered from history. The machine finds it in an instant, pulling it from a digital ocean deeper than any library could hold. For a moment, the dream of Alexandria is fulfilled: all knowledge, available, alive. And yet, as he scrolls, he feels no peace. The more he reads, the less it means. The words flicker too quickly, the connections blur. The miracle becomes noise. This is the irony of our new library. It has achieved infinity, but lost intimacy. In our quest to know everything, we have forgotten how to dwell in mystery. The ancients built walls to hold meaning. We build networks that dissolve it. Alexandria sought to preserve wisdom. We seek to replicate it endlessly, without pause or reflection. And so, surrounded by infinite knowledge, we find ourselves lonelier than ever, wanderers in a world where everything is recorded, but nothing is remembered. Still, the dream persists. Every upload, every archive, every digital restoration is an offering to that same invisible temple of curiosity. The library has simply gone underground, or rather, online, humming quietly in cables and clouds, waiting for humanity to remember that knowing is not the same as understanding. Perhaps the tragedy of the modern age is not that we have too little information, but that we have too much and too little time to feel any of it. The old scribes once copied slowly, reverently, aware that each word carried the weight of eternity. Now, words flicker by the million every second, stripped of the silence that once gave them meaning. The torch of knowledge burns brighter but also faster, consuming itself. And yet, in some small way, the circle remains unbroken. The dream of a universal library of a world gathered into a single mind continues. The technology may be new, but the longing is ancient. The same pulse that moved through the halls of Alexandria moves now through fiber optics and screens. Humanity still stands before the infinite, reaching out, unable to stop. We built the map of everything, but the territory still escapes us. Each connection creates new distance. Each answer breeds another question. Perhaps the library's secret was never to hold all knowledge, but to remind us that knowledge without wonder is hollow. The world glows now with invisible shelves, vast, humming archives that no eye can see. Somewhere within them, every thought humanity has ever recorded waits to be found. And yet, the silence between those data points, the spaces unmeasured, the mysteries unrecorded, may still hold more truth than all the stored words combined. The library of today is not a ruin or a dream. It is a mirror, showing us the cost of our triumph. We have achieved the impossible, and in doing so, rediscovered our limits. For in the endless scroll of information, we are still the same as we ever were, seekers standing at the edge of a sea, listening to the whisper of waves, wondering what lies beneath. And as the light of the screens flickers, the question remains: in a world where everything is known, what is left to discover? The abundance of knowledge leads to its opposite, confusion and noise. And in that static, the whisper of Alexandria begins again, reminding us that perhaps the greatest wisdom lies not in knowing everything, but in remembering how to listen. Perhaps the gods never feared our ignorance, only our certainty. There comes a point in every age when humanity stands too close to its own fire. Knowledge, once a candle against darkness, becomes a blaze that blinds the very eyes it was meant to guide. The dream of the library of gathering all things known was always a beautiful danger. For the more we understand, the more we begin to mistake understanding for wisdom. We begin to believe we have reached the end of wonder, and in doing so, we lose it. In quiet hours, when the world hums with information and sleep feels far away, the question returns: was the burning of the library a tragedy or a mercy? For centuries, we have mourned its loss, as though an empire of memory was torn from our grasp. But perhaps what perished that night was not knowledge itself, but arrogance, the belief that everything could be known. The fire, then, was not destruction but restraint, a reminder, whispered through smoke, that even brilliance needs boundaries. It is a thought that unsettles modern minds. We have built machines that know more than their makers, databases that hold the echoes of civilizations. We can measure the tremors of distant galaxies, map the code of life itself, and yet, we stand increasingly unsure of meaning. In our triumph over ignorance, we have entered a new kind of darkness, one lit by screens, but devoid of reflection. The more we see, the less we perceive. The curse of knowing is not chaos, but exhaustion. The ancients warned us of this. In the myth of Babel, humankind built a tower to reach the heavens, a monument of unity and intellect. But as the tower rose higher, its builders forgot why they built it. Their tongues were scattered, their speech divided, and the tower crumbled before completion. The story endures because it mirrors our own pattern. Every time we climb too high on the promise of comprehension, something in us falters. The languages of truth fracture again, and we are left with fragments data without meaning, brilliance without grace. The fall of the library feels like Babel's echo. The dream was the same, to touch eternity through understanding. But perhaps the gods, if they exist, do not punish us for striving. Perhaps they only protect us from succeeding. For what would it mean to truly know all things, to look upon the universe and find no mystery left to love? That is not enlightenment, it is emptiness. Knowledge without wonder is a desert, and no civilization can bloom there for long. The scholars of Alexandria understood this, though they rarely spoke it aloud. Amid their endless scrolls and debates, they carried a quiet humility. Each discovery opened 10 new questions. Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference with astonishing precision, yet confessed that the sky's design still baffled him. Herophilus mapped the human body, yet said the soul remained beyond anatomy. Even in their brilliance, they recognized their limits. The library was not built to conquer the unknown, but to honor it. It was a temple to the pursuit of understanding, not its completion. Somewhere along the way, humanity forgot that distinction. We began to see knowledge as conquest, a territory to be claimed. We speak of breakthroughs, of revolutions, of mastering nature as though learning were a weapon and not a conversation. The old scholars sought communion with truth. We seek control. And in that difference lies the curse. For knowledge gained without humility becomes its own kind of blindness, a light too bright to see by. Imagine standing before the sea at night. You can hear its vastness before you see it, the deep, rhythmic pull that feels older than language. In that darkness, you are small, but not diminished. You sense that the world is immense, alive, unknowable, and in that recognition, you feel peace. But turn on a floodlight, and the mystery vanishes. The surface gleams, the depth disappears. The water is the same, yet its spirit feels gone. The unknown is not our enemy, it is our mirror. In the modern world, surrounded by facts and figures, we rarely encounter that mirror anymore. We scroll past it, impatient for answers. We no longer pause to wonder why knowing so much leaves us so hollow. Perhaps because wisdom is not the collection of truths, but the understanding of limits. The ancients had rituals for mystery oracles, riddles, sacred silences. They treated ignorance as a teacher, not a flaw. In losing that reverence, we have traded wonder for noise. Consider the myths that once framed our search for knowledge. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods to give light to humankind, was not celebrated for long. His gift brought warmth, but also weaponry. He was chained to a rock, condemned to eternal suffering not because he enlightened humanity, but because he defied balance. His punishment was not cruelty, it was equilibrium restored. The lesson was never about withholding progress, but about remembering cost. The gods, whether real or imagined, seem to care less about what we learn, and more about what we forget in learning it. The library's loss, then, can be seen not as erasure, but as renewal. It forced knowledge to migrate, to evolve, to find new voices. When one archive burned, 1,000 minds became its keepers. The silence that followed the flames was not emptiness, but space for humility to return. Humanity was reminded that no collection, no archive, no network, however vast, could contain the living pulse of truth. Today, our new libraries stretch across invisible realms, digital, infinite, ever-growing. But their vastness feels strangely familiar. We have recreated the Dream of Alexandria, yet the same question hums beneath the surface. How much is too much? When does the pursuit of knowledge cease to serve wisdom and begin to serve itself? The curse of knowing lies not in discovery, but in forgetting why we seek. Perhaps this is why we still find comfort in mystery, why we still gaze at the stars knowing their light is ancient, unreachable, why we still whisper about secrets buried beneath ruins or beneath time. We need what cannot be explained, because it reminds us that we are participants in a story larger than ourselves. Knowledge tells us how the world works. Mystery tells us why it matters. Without both, we collapse into cynicism. Clever, but hollow. There is a grace in ignorance when it is chosen, not from apathy, but from awe. To admit that some things exceed us is not weakness, it is reverence. The mind that kneels before the unknown does not diminish itself, it expands. The Library of Alexandria was an act of devotion, not dominance. It was humanity reaching upward, but also inward, toward understanding that could never be fully grasped. Maybe that is why its story still moves us. Not because it was lost, but because it reminds us that loss has value. The gaps in history, the silences in knowledge, these are not failures, but breathing spaces. Without them, there is no room for imagination, for empathy, for faith. If all was known, nothing would be sacred. The fire that consumed the library, preserved in its own cruel mercy, the possibility of wonder. The curse of knowing is that it ends the story. When all mysteries are solved, curiosity dies, and with it, the very thing that makes us human. The ancient scholars, for all their brilliance, never sought to finish the world. They sought to listen to it, to understand enough to live in harmony with what could not be known. That may be the truest wisdom of all, to know when to stop knowing. So when we look back at the flames of Alexandria, perhaps we should not only mourn what was lost, perhaps we should also give thanks. For in its ashes, humanity was reminded that knowledge is not a crown, but a circle one that must always leave space for the unknown. And as the modern world drowns in information, as screens glow brighter and truths blur faster, that lesson feels more urgent than ever. The gods or whatever stands in their place now still whisper the same warning through the static. Be careful with the light. It burns as easily as it shines. The story of the library is not only about what humanity learned, but about what it was meant to forget. For in forgetting, we make space to feel. And in feeling, we rediscover what knowledge alone cannot give meaning. The abundance of knowing has brought us to the edge of blindness. But beyond that edge lies balance, the beauty of what remains unknowable. The library's greatest secret was not what it held, but what it chose to keep silent. There are moments in history, and in the heart, when silence says more than any word could. In the old library, amid the rustle of papyrus and the whisper of turning scrolls, there was a kind of hush, a stillness so complete it felt alive. The scribes moved like shadows between shelves, their footsteps softened by centuries of devotion. Even the air seemed careful not to disturb what was being remembered. The silence was not emptiness. It was reverence, a pause between thoughts, a breath between truths. If you listen closely to the stories of Alexandria, you begin to realize that what made the library sacred was not only the knowledge it preserved, but the restraint it practiced. For every scroll copied, countless others were lost, rejected, or hidden. The scholars who worked there knew that not everything deserved to be recorded, that some mysteries should remain unsolved, some truths unnamed. In their restraint, there was wisdom. They understood what the modern world often forgets, that silence is not ignorance, it is protection. Imagine a candle burning beside an open scroll. The flame flickers, and its light dances across inked lines, revealing words and shadows alike. What we see depends on where the light falls, and what remains in darkness is just as important. The scholars of Alexandria read not only the written but the unwritten, sensing meaning in the pauses between symbols, in the spaces left blank by purpose. They believed that every gap, every silence, held a kind of divinity, the untouched part of truth. Today, our libraries hum with constant noise. We measure value by access, depth by data. We fill silence with explanation, as though quiet were a flaw to be corrected. Yet the world itself has never agreed. The sea, after all, erases even as it reveals. The tide washes over ancient shores, blurring footprints, smoothing words carved in stone. Nature, in its infinite memory, prefers suggestion to permanence. It teaches that to endure, one must sometimes be forgotten. Perhaps the library understood this too. Its silence was not an accident of time, but a deliberate gesture, an acknowledgement that truth, to remain whole, must sometimes hide. The scrolls that were never found, the works lost to decay, may still exist in another form, not as words, but as echoes. Ideas do not die when unwritten. They drift, reshaping themselves in the minds of those ready to hear them again. In every age, wisdom speaks softly. The loudest voices record events, declare truths, demand certainty. But the deepest insights arrive in whispers between lines of poetry, in the space after a prayer, in the stillness between two heartbeats. The library's silence was not a void but a mirror, reflecting the listener's own depth. It offered no conclusions, only invitations to wonder. That may be why its memory endures so powerfully, because it left room for us to imagine. Even in destruction, that silence remained. When the flames rose and scrolls turned to ash, the scholars who escaped carried not only fragments of text, but the essence of that stillness within them. It travelled with them across deserts and oceans, finding new homes in monasteries, scriptoria, observatories. Wherever knowledge was kept with care, that silence followed an invisible inheritance. It was not the sound of loss, but of continuity. The hush that falls after something precious is passed from one generation to the next. If you stand near the sea where Alexandria once shimmered, you can still feel it. The waves break softly against the shore, and in the spaces between them, a rhythm emerges, the same rhythm that once filled the library's halls. It is the sound of thought itself, patient, circular, eternal. The silence between words is not absence, it is structure. It gives meaning to speech, shape to music, and life to understanding. Without it, all knowledge would collapse into noise. Humanity's greatest mistake has never been ignorance, but impatience. We rush to define what should be experienced, to fill every gap with certainty. But the wisest among us philosophers, mystics, poets, have always known that what is unsaid holds more power than what is explained. The mystics called it the luminous darkness, a space where meaning hides, waiting to be felt rather than learned. The scribes of Alexandria, though scientists of their age, understood this same mystery. Their silence was not superstition, it was respect. Picture a scholar late at night, seated beneath a flickering oil lamp. Around him lie stacks of scrolls, half read, half forgotten. Outside, the city sleeps. He dips his quill into ink, pauses, and hesitates. There is a word he cannot write, not because he does not know it, but because he knows too well what it would mean. So he leaves a space instead, a blank line across the parchment. Centuries later, when the fragment is found, historians argue over what might have filled it. But perhaps that gap was intentional, a quiet decision to let the reader imagine what could not be said. That is the beauty of silence. It invites participation. It turns the audience into co-creators. The library's mystery endures not because of what we have discovered about it, but because of what we have not. It exists now as an unfinished sentence written across history, one the world continues to complete in every telling. In silence, the story remains alive, flexible, timeless, breathing. There is a sacred rhythm in all things that endure. Music depends on rest as much as sound. Stars are defined not only by their light, but by the darkness that frames them. The library was no different. Its quiet was its preservation, a recognition that eternity does not shout. It hums softly beneath the noise. When we speak of lost knowledge, we rarely consider that some losses are intentional. There are truths that would crush us if revealed too soon, knowledge that demands humility before it offers grace. Perhaps that is why the library never fully returned, because some part of it still waits for us to be ready. The silence that remains is not withholding, it is mercy. Modern life fears stillness. We live surrounded by endless words in messages, feeds, notifications, explanations. But silence remains a form of rebellion, a sanctuary for the tired mind. To pause, to listen, to accept that some questions have no answers, that is the closest we come to the ancient peace that once filled Alexandria's halls. The quiet between words is not the end of meaning, it is where meaning begins. So tonight, as you listen, imagine the library not as ruin, but as breath. Its shelves rise again in memory, its scholars return in shadow, and its silence unfolds like a tide. The pages are blank now, but alive with potential, waiting for a reader who understands that not everything must be written to be real. The library's secret endures in every quiet moment of reflection, in every pause before speaking, in every unspoken truth that lingers at the edge of thought. It is there when you close your eyes, when the noise of the day fades, and the mind begins to hear itself again. In that silence, knowledge becomes wisdom not through accumulation, but through surrender. The library was not lost to history. It was transformed into something gentler, more enduring. It became the pause between humanity's questions, the soft inhale before the next attempt to understand. And as the voice of the past drifts into stillness, the story turns inward once more. For silence, when truly heard, does not end thought, it begins it. And in its quiet reflection lies the next mystery. Why do we, who crave peace, continue to hide what we love most? Every time we seek the past, we relight Alexandria's flame. The story of the library has never been about loss alone. It is about return, the quiet rhythm by which the world forgets, remembers, and begins again. Every civilization, no matter how brilliant or fragile, seems destined to walk this same path. To gather what it knows, to lose it in fire or time, and to rediscover it anew. It is not a tragedy, but a pulse, the heartbeat of human memory. The Library of Alexandria may have turned to ash, yet its spirit lingers in every act of remembering. Each time a scholar opens an ancient book, each time a traveller pauses before a ruin, each time a listener wonders what was once known, the circle begins again. Forgetting is never the end. It is the soil from which remembrance grows. Like the tide, knowledge recedes and returns, carrying fragments of what once was. Nothing truly vanishes, it simply changes form. Picture a coastline at dawn. The sea, calm and endless, stretches toward the horizon. Waves erase the marks of the night before footprints, writing in the sand traces of fire. Yet, as the sun rises, the same waves bring back pieces of the deep, shells, driftwood, forgotten things. This, too, is how memory moves, erasing and delivering, forgetting and returning, always in motion, always incomplete. The library's fire was not an ending, but an exhale, the world letting go so that it might one day breathe again. There is a quiet wisdom in this rhythm. The ancients knew that creation and destruction are twins. Temples crumble so new ones can rise. Forests burn so seeds can find the light. In the same way, ideas must sometimes vanish to be reborn in clearer form. The flame that consumed Alexandria did not devour knowledge. It purified it. It scattered fragments across the earth, to Baghdad, to Cordoba, to the monasteries of Ireland where new hands would find them, translate them, transform them. What was lost in language returned in meaning. To remember is not merely to recall, it is to recreate. When we speak of Alexandria, we do not reconstruct its shelves or scrolls, we rebuild its dream. Each retelling shapes the library anew, weaving it into the fabric of our present. Its survival lies not in ruins, but in repetition, in the stories whispered about it across centuries. Like a melody carried by memory, it survives by being sung, not stored. In this way, the library is less a place than a pattern, a symbol of what it means to be human. We are all, in our own ways, archives of light and shadow. We hold knowledge, we lose it, we rediscover it in altered form. Our memories shift like sands, and yet some essence remains constant. The people of Alexandria once believed that by collecting all knowledge, they could preserve truth forever. But perhaps the greater truth is that nothing can be preserved, only renewed. Forgetting is not failure, it is grace. The mind, like the world, cannot hold everything at once. It must release to make space for new understanding. The past is not buried behind us. It lives within our forgetting, shaping what we become. To let go of what we cannot carry is to make room for what will matter next. Even the greatest civilizations, Egypt, Greece, Rome, understood this instinctively. Their monuments crumble, but their ideas endure because they were allowed to fade and return, like breath. Perhaps that is why history feels so familiar when it repeats. We are not looping in error, but in rhythm. Each age inherits fragments of the one before a word, a belief, a story, and builds anew from what remains. The library's ashes nourish the soil of future learning. The monks who copied Aristotle did not resurrect the past exactly, they reinterpreted it. The astronomers of the Renaissance did not merely recover Greek thought, they expanded it into stars. Memory, when reborn, is never the same. It is transformed by time, by longing, by love. There is something deeply human in this cycle. We are not creatures of permanence, but of recurrence. We forget faces, then see them again in dreams. We lose places, then rebuild them in imagination. The same impulse that created Alexandria lives quietly in every heart that longs to remember not perfectly but tenderly. To recall is to recreate meaning, to hold the echo rather than the note. That is the secret of endurance. The library, if it could speak, might have said, "I was never meant to last, only to return." Its fire ensured its immortality by making it unfinished. Because it ended, it could be retold forever. And in each telling, something different survives a new reflection, a new emotion, a new truth. Destruction, paradoxically, made it infinite. We can see this pattern in ourselves. Every memory we hold passes through the same cycle: creation, loss, rediscovery. Childhood fades, yet its feelings return in sudden glimpses: a scent, a song, a familiar voice. The mind forgets details, but keeps rhythm. And just as the library lived through those who remembered it, our own lives continue through the echoes we leave in others. The circle does not break when we are gone. It widens. In the quiet of night, when thought slows and memory drifts like smoke, the human mind mirrors history's rhythm. It gathers, releases, and gathers again. This is why stories matter, because they are how we remember what cannot be kept. Each retelling is a torch passed forward, lighting the way for another soul to see. When one generation forgets, another remembers differently. The library's flame passes between them, unseen but unextinguished. There is a kind of peace in accepting this. To cling to permanence is to suffer. To embrace transience is to be free. The ancients built their monuments from stone, but the wisdom they carried was far lighter. It lived in air, in rhythm, in the breath of telling. Alexandria's dream was never confined to walls. Its essence was movement, the flow of knowledge from one heart to another. That is why it still breathes, even now, through stories whispered to calm the restless mind. Perhaps the greatest act of remembrance is not to rebuild, but to feel, to sense the pulse of what once was and let it move through you. When you listen to the story of the library, you are not hearing history, you are participating in it. The flame that once lit its halls flickers now within your imagination. You are, in this moment, one of its keepers. Every civilization that forgets eventually remembers. Every fire leaves behind embers that glow in unexpected places. The library's ruins may rest beneath the sea, but its dream drifts through time, surfacing wherever curiosity meets wonder. It lived in the scrolls of Baghdad, in the observatories of Samarkand, in the manuscripts of Florence. It lives now in every archive, every classroom, every human heart that hungers to know. The flame has changed colour, but not its light. And so the story turns gentle once more, a lullaby of cycles and continuance. The library's fate is not unique, it is universal. The world builds itself through remembering and forgetting, through loss and renewal. Each age becomes a library of its own, full of voices, fragile and luminous, destined one day to fade so others may rise. To remember, then, is to participate in creation. To forget is to allow creation to continue. The two are not opposites but companions, as silence is to sound. The library's silence was not an ending, but a pause, a breath between worlds. We are the echo of that breath, the next line in its unfinished story. In the rhythm of remembering and forgetting, humanity finds its balance. Knowledge burns, wisdom grows. The ashes cool, new voices begin. The circle of Alexandria turns, and within it, everything endures changed but alive. As the night deepens, the narrator's voice softens to a whisper, as though the story itself is drifting towards sleep. The library rests, not in ruins, but in rhythm, a heartbeat heard across centuries. And as we listen, we understand. We were never meant to keep everything, only to keep remembering. From ancient patterns, the tale begins to unfold again, moving from what was lost to what followed, from the dream that burned to the hidden libraries that rose in its shadow. For the flame, once lit, never truly goes out. It only waits for the next dawn to rise. They said the river carried words instead of water. In the heart of Baghdad, beneath the shimmer of desert heat, a second Alexandria was born. It did not rise from marble or stone, but from ink and language, a living bridge between worlds. The year was the 9th century, when the caliphs of the Abbasid Empire dreamed of uniting all knowledge under one roof, not for conquest, but for comprehension. They called it Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, and within its quiet walls, humanity's forgotten light began to burn again. Imagine the city then, golden domes glinting beneath an endless sky, the air rich with the scent of parchment and oil lamps. Courtyards alive with debate, corridors lined with shelves, rooms where translation became devotion. The scholars who gathered there were not conquerors or priests, they were seekers. From Greece, from Persia, from India, from Egypt, fragments of ancient worlds arrived, carried on camel caravans and the backs of scribes. Scrolls rescued from ruin, bound in silk, inked with thought. Every translation was an act of resurrection. They began, as Alexandria once did, with faith that the universe could be understood, that the patterns of stars and numbers were not chaos but design. The House of Wisdom became a sanctuary for this pursuit. Al-Kindi, the philosopher, sought harmony between reason and revelation. Al-Khwarizmi, the mathematician, shaped symbols into something eternal, the algorithm, the silent architecture that would one day define our world. Astronomers charted heavens once mapped by Ptolemy. Physicians dissected disease with the precision of poetry. The house was not just a library, it was a breathing mind. To walk its halls was to hear 1,000 languages hum in unison. Greek became Arabic, Sanskrit became sense. Lost civilizations found new life in the pens of translators who saw themselves as custodians of the world's soul. They worked not for glory, but for continuity, to ensure that what had been discovered would not vanish again into the dust. Some said the House of Wisdom glowed at night, that its light could be seen from the riverbank, reflecting across the Tigris like a constellation fallen to earth. It was, for a moment, perfection. But all light carries the memory of shadow. The same knowledge that united also unsettled. Empires built on wisdom still feared its weight. Even as Baghdad flourished, whispers of unease grew louder. The idea that too much knowing might unmake faith, that curiosity might loosen obedience. Scholars continued their work in silence, their brilliance guarded by secrecy. They knew that every age that worships knowledge eventually turns against it. Alexandria had burned. They felt its smoke in their dreams. Yet still they wrote. Still they translated. Still they believed. They copied Aristotle by candlelight, reimagined Euclid, wove the philosophy of India into Arabic verse. The house was a miracle of coexistence. Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians working side by side, bound by reverence for the written word. For 2 centuries, Baghdad shone as the center of the world's thought, a city that did not rule by sword but by sentence. Its scholars measured the circumference of the earth, traced the flow of light through glass, and invented algebra, the reunion of broken parts. Even its name sounded like healing. But history does not allow miracles to linger. In the 13th century, the horizon darkened with dust and hooves. The Mongols came from the east, a storm without mercy. Baghdad's golden age was ending, though few dared to believe it. When the city fell in 1258, it was not just an empire that perished, but an inheritance. The invaders saw no sanctuary in parchment or ink. The House of Wisdom, that fragile cathedral of learning, was torn open. Scrolls were ripped from shelves, manuscripts hurled into the Tigris. For days, the river ran black with words. They said the water itself grew heavy, thick with ink that it shimmered like oil under the Sunday. Those who watched could not tell whether the current carried destruction or salvation. Perhaps both. For though the pages were gone, their ideas had already scattered, carried west by traders, pilgrims, and dreamers. Just as the Library of Alexandria had become a seed for Baghdad, Baghdad's flame would travel again to Damascus, to Cairo, to Andalusia, and far beyond. The circle was turning once more. In that dark hour, the scholars who survived did what humanity has always done when the world ends. They remembered. They whispered names, recited formulas, redrew diagrams from memory. Knowledge had always survived by breath, and by repetition one voice speaking to another, refusing silence. Even as the Tigris swallowed the past, something invisible rose from its depths. Not ink, not words, but intention. The House of Wisdom had never been only a building. It was an idea. And ideas cannot drown. Centuries later, When Europe awakened from its long slumber and called it Renaissance, it was the voice of Baghdad that spoke through its books. The very numbers used to chart the stars and balance the Earth's orbit, the so-called Arabic numerals, were born from that house. Algebra, algorithms, the concept of zero, each a whisper from the scholars of the desert. The maps of the world, the measurements of the heavens, the roots of medicine all carried their signatures. The river that once ran black with loss had, in truth, become a current of transmission. Its ink flowed onward, unseen, shaping every mind that would follow. And yet, there remains something profoundly human in the sorrow of that flood. Every listener who imagines the Tigris dark with ink feels a deep ache, a recognition that knowledge, no matter how carefully kept, is always fragile. The story of the House of Wisdom is not only one of brilliance, but of impermanence. It teaches that enlightenment and erasure are twins, one gives birth to the other. The flame of wisdom draws the moths of destruction, as it always has. And still, we light it again. At night, Baghdad must have glowed like a lantern in the desert, its domes and minarets outlined against a sky filled with stars. The scholars who walked those streets could not have known that they were living inside a legend, that their every word would one day become memory, their silence, myth. But perhaps they sensed it, as all who work for eternity do. In their patience, their faith, their devotion to the written line, they built something larger than themselves, a bridge of ink between civilizations. The Mongols could burn the shelves, drown the scrolls, silence the city, but not the rhythm. That rhythm, the pulse of remembering, continued elsewhere. It crossed oceans and deserts, hid in monasteries, flickered in the lamplight of new libraries. From the ashes of Alexandria to the flood of Baghdad, humanity kept the same vow, to begin again. And so, the House of Wisdom joins the great lineage of vanished sanctuaries, places that held the world for a moment before releasing it back to mystery. The story is not of loss, but of continuity. The Tigris carried the words onward, mingling them with the flow of time itself. What drowned in water resurfaced in mind. What was destroyed in name survived in number. Listen long enough, and you can still hear it, a murmur beneath the centuries, soft as the turning of a page. The scholars are gone, the walls have fallen, but their devotion remains. It echoes in the way we calculate, the way we question, the way we believe that the world can be understood through reason and care. That faith, fragile, luminous, eternal, is Baghdad's true inheritance. The river carried words instead of water, and in doing so, it carried us. From these darkened waters, the story flows onward south and west, toward the edge of the Sahara, where another hidden library waits in the sand. Its pages, too, are filled with the voices of survival, of memory, of light preserved against the wind. The next flame rises in Timbuktu, a city of golden dust and quiet guardians, where once again humanity tries to remember what it cannot bear to lose. In the desert, they built libraries of silence. Far from the marble grandeur of Alexandria or the golden domes of Baghdad, there lies a city made of dust and light. Its name drifts through history like a whisper, Timbuktu. For centuries, travelers doubted it was real. They spoke of it as legend, a mirage shimmering at the edge of the Sahara. Yet it existed, and within its humble walls, humanity performed its quietest miracle. It remembered. Here, in the heart of Mali's desert, there were no vast halls, no towering columns, no rivers turned to ink. Instead, there were courtyards of clay and sand, small rooms where manuscripts were stacked like treasures in earthen boxes. Every family, it seemed, possessed its own archive, thousands of pages bound in leather, handwritten in delicate Arabic script. They were books of astronomy and poetry, of medicine and law, of theology and trade. Each was a voice preserved against the wind. To understand Timbuktu is to understand devotion, without spectacle. These were not scholars chasing glory, nor kings building monuments to their name. They were ordinary men and women merchants, imams, mothers who became guardians by necessity. Knowledge here was not a luxury, it was inheritance. Passed from hand to hand, hidden beneath floorboards or buried under sand, it survived not because of empire, but because of care. Imagine a night beneath desert stars. The air is cool, the city asleep. Somewhere in a mud-walled home, a father kneels by lamplight, lifting the corner of a rug to reveal a small wooden chest. Inside, wrapped in linen, lie manuscripts centuries old. He touches them not as possessions, but as living things fragile yet enduring, each page breathing the memory of those who wrote before him. Outside, the wind hums softly through the dunes, carrying whispers of verses and prayers. The desert listens and keeps the secret. Timbuktu's golden age began in the 14th century, when caravans from across Africa, Arabia, and Europe converged along its routes. The city became a crossroads of trade salt, gold, ivory, and of thought. Scholars gathered in mosques and homes to study texts that had journeyed from Baghdad, Cairo, and Andalusia. The Library of Alexandria was gone, but its spirit had found a new home in clay. The city's three great mosques, Sankore, Jingreba, and Sidi Yahya, became centers of learning, each with its own libraries. Thousands of students memorized, copied, and debated the words of long-dead masters. Timbuktu was not only a place, it was a pulse, the echo of the world's memory still beating in the sands. But as with all centers of light, shadows soon followed. Empires shifted, colonizers came, wars burned across the Sahara. The manuscripts, too delicate to survive greed or conquest, needed protectors once more. Families sealed them away, hiding their collections under layers of dust and silence. For centuries, they kept their secret, pretending ignorance when outsiders asked, pretending poverty when looters searched. The desert became both vault and veil. When the French arrived in the late 19th century, they found only fragments of the city's true treasure. The scholars had scattered, the archives dispersed among hundreds of private homes. The colonial officer once wrote that Timbuktu was a disappointment, a town of mud huts. He could not see that beneath those mud walls lay one of humanity's greatest libraries, buried for safety. The families of Timbuktu had learned a lesson older than empire, that survival depends not on being seen, but on being silent. Generations passed, wars came and went. Still, the manuscripts slept beneath the dust. Some were damaged by time, some eaten by insects, some forgotten but not destroyed. When modern archaeologists and historians began to rediscover them in the 20th century, they were astonished. Over 700,000 manuscripts surfaced, many dating back to the 12th century. They revealed a history long denied a learned Africa, deeply connected to the world's knowledge. Timbuktu had not been the edge of civilization. It had been its heartbeat. The manuscripts spoke of mathematics, astronomy, law, poetry, and love. Some described the movement of stars with astonishing precision. Others debated theology or explored the ethics of leadership. A few were simply notes, records of trade, or recipes for medicine. But together they formed something extraordinary, proof that wisdom does not belong to the conquerors of history, but to those humble enough to preserve it. There is quiet heroism in preservation. It demands patience, anonymity, and faith in the unseen. The families of Timbuktu were never celebrated in their time. They lived and died in the same silence that kept their manuscripts safe. During the early 2000s, as conflict once again reached Mali, that same instinct awoke. Militants advanced toward Timbuktu, threatening to burn what they could not understand. The people remembered their ancestors' lessons. They began to move the manuscripts thousands upon thousands of pages out of the city, hidden in metal boxes, carts, and even sacks of rice. They travelled by night, risking everything to save what paper could not protect itself. It was not a grand rescue led by armies, but a quiet exodus. Librarians, schoolteachers, farmers, and families carried centuries of memory through the desert, guided only by the stars. Many manuscripts were smuggled to Bamako, the capital, where they now rest in secret vaults. Others remained behind, buried again in the earth. The rescuers asked for no recognition. They had done what generations before them had done, kept the silence alive. To imagine those manuscripts sleeping beneath sand is to glimpse the gentlest defiance humanity has ever known. Each buried page is a refusal to let the world forget itself. Each hidden word is an act of faith. Faith that one day someone will dig and find and read again. The desert, indifferent and vast, has become the guardian of memory. It swallows empires, but not intention. The image of Timbuktu endures because it offers a different kind of power, not the brilliance of conquest, but the strength of endurance. Its libraries are not cathedrals of stone, but veins of dust and devotion. The people who preserved them remind us that knowledge does not survive through wealth or technology, but through care, through the willingness to keep a secret for centuries, simply because it is sacred. Even now, when digital servers hum across the world and archives live in clouds of data, the spirit of Timbuktu lingers. We still bury our treasures not in sand, but in code. We still guard them against theft, against erasure, against forgetting. The forms change, but the instinct remains. Humanity has always built its libraries between fragility and faith. If you were to stand today in the desert wind and close your eyes, you might hear it a faint sound beneath the shifting dunes. It is the murmur of pages, the breath of parchment as it turns in memory. The manuscripts are speaking still, in their language of patience. They are telling us that not all survival is loud. Some of it hides, some of it waits, and some of it whispers. And perhaps this is what Alexandria and Baghdad were always leading toward, not the brilliance of empire, but the endurance of the ordinary. The scholars of Timbuktu never sought to gather all knowledge. They simply refused to let what they had disappear. Their libraries of silence remind us that preservation is not about holding everything, but holding on to what matters most. So the circle continues, from fire to flood, from ink to sand. The Library of Alexandria burned, the House of Wisdom drowned, but in the desert, humanity learned another way to remember, by hiding. In this quiet endurance lies the gentlest form of immortality. As the dunes shift and centuries pass, the manuscripts rest, patient as the stars above them. Their keepers fade into legend, their names unrecorded, their hands forgotten. But the silence they built remains vast, unbroken, and filled with meaning. The desert holds what the world discards, and within its stillness, the flame of memory glows soft, steady, eternal. The wind over Timbuktu sounds like the turning of a page. From these sands, the story moves forward toward a new kind of library, one made not of clay or papyrus, but of circuits and light. The hidden deserts lead us to modern vaults, where the same instinct endures, to protect what cannot be replaced, to preserve in secret what the world is not yet wise enough to keep safe. We have built a new Alexandria beneath the earth, but who guards it now? In a world no longer ruled by kings or caliphs, the dream of total knowledge has not faded. It has only changed form. Where once we built libraries of stone, papyrus, and parchment, we now build them from silicon and light. The archives of the modern world hum in perpetual twilight windowless chambers, buried beneath mountains, frozen vaults in the Arctic, and vast data centers hidden in plain sight behind concrete and glass. They are our new temples, our quiet cathedrals of memory. Step into one, and you can hear it a low, unbroken vibration like a modern hymn. Rows upon rows of servers blink softly in the dark, their LEDs pulsing like candle flames. Air circulates with surgical precision. No dust, no sound, but the endless hum of cooling fans. Here, the past no longer rests in scrolls or bindings, but in sequences of code, trillions of fragments of human thought preserved as electricity. Every photograph, letter, confession, and secret the world has ever shared flickers in these invisible halls. The dream that began in Alexandria to hold all knowledge in one place has finally come true. And yet, as we look upon this silent expanse, the question returns. What have we actually built? The idea of preservation was once sacred. It was a vow against oblivion to keep the light burning through the ages. But somewhere between ink and code, that vow has blurred. Our archives no longer discriminate. They keep everything, the profound and the trivial, the sacred and the disposable. Nothing is forgotten, but little is remembered. The act of saving has become mechanical, stripped of intention. Machines record what we no longer have time to understand. Imagine a server farm stretching across acres, millions of drives spinning ceaselessly, storing the heartbeat of civilization. Every click, every search, every fleeting thought cast into the digital sea becomes part of this collective archive. In theory, it is immortal. In practice, it is fragile, a memory that depends on power, temperature, and constant repair. The same electricity that gives it life threatens to erase it in an instant. We have created an Alexandria that cannot burn, but it can vanish silently through a glitch, a corruption, or the simple decay of time measured in electrons. The new librarians are not scribes but engineers. They wear gloves instead of robes, and their tools are algorithms, not ink. They work not by candlelight but by fluorescent hum, ensuring that the servers never sleep. Their work is both precise and endless, backups of backups, mirrored copies of mirrored lives. Yet, unlike the keepers of the past, they do not read what they preserve. They protect data, not meaning. And perhaps that is where something vital has shifted. The old libraries from Alexandria to Baghdad to Timbuktu were temples of interpretation. Every page held a question, and every reader became part of its answer. Knowledge was a dialogue between the living and the dead. Today, our archives no longer ask to be read. They simply exist, vast and indifferent. What we save now is not wisdom, but accumulation. The machine does not ponder, it records. It knows how to store but not how to forget. And forgetting, it seems, was once essential. The ancients understood that memory must breathe that, to preserve everything, is to smother it. They accepted the rhythm of loss. What burns, renews, what fades, clarifies. But the digital age fears absence. Every photo is backed up, every message archived, every file duplicated. We have become the hoarders of our own history, terrified that anything might slip away. In doing so, we have created a paradox. An ocean of memory too vast to navigate, too deep to see. Beneath the Arctic ice, in Svalbard, lies a vault known as the Global Seed Bank. It holds the genetic code of the world's crops, a biological archive designed to outlast civilization itself. Nearby, another vault, the Arctic World Archive, stores digital replicas of humanity's knowledge, art, literature, treaties, and genomes etched into film designed to endure for 1,000 years. The temperature remains constant, the air dry and still. It is a place where time slows, a sanctuary built against extinction. Yet even there, a quiet unease lingers. For what happens if the future never comes to open these doors? Who will read the memory if memory itself outlives us? The image of a library beneath ice is hauntingly beautiful. Humanity's attempt to leave a trace, to whisper across centuries. But it is also melancholy. The more we preserve, the more distant we become from the living experience of knowledge. The act of remembering has been outsourced to machines, and in that delegation, something tender is lost. We are still the children of Alexandria, still driven by the same longing to defy time. But now, our devotion is colder, more mechanical. We preserve everything, yet we understand less. Even language is transforming under the weight of preservation. Algorithms now read and translate what no human eye will ever see. Artificial intelligence combs through billions of words, finding patterns we no longer recognize. The archive has begun to think for itself, not in dreams or philosophies, but in probabilities. It predicts, sorts, and ranks meaning. In a sense, the machine has become our next librarian, efficient, tireless, and blind. Yet amid all this precision, the human spirit still flickers. Somewhere, an archivist handles an old reel of film and feels its fragility. Somewhere, a digital preservationist worries about the lifespan of a format. Somewhere, a historian stands before a cold rack of servers and realizes that these blinking lights are the new manuscripts, delicate, ephemeral, and mortal. We are still building temples against forgetting, even if we no longer light candles in them. The glow has simply changed color. The archives of the world now hum like cities of memory. From the depths of old salt mines to secret data centers in mountains, humanity has woven a global tapestry of preservation. It is magnificent and deeply lonely. We have achieved what the ancients could only imagine, near-perfect recall. Yet in that perfection lies a new kind of loss, the loss of forgetting, of silence, of renewal. For what is memory without the grace of disappearance? If Alexandria burned to remind us of impermanence, and Baghdad drowned to remind us of fragility, then our new archives stand as monuments to permanence itself, and perhaps that is the most dangerous illusion of all. Nothing endures forever, not even the circuits that hum in darkness. Entropy is the only true librarian, patient and absolute. The archives we build today are only temporary sanctuaries, destined to fade like every other. Still, there is something beautiful in the attempt. Beneath the earth, beneath ice, beneath time itself, the human desire to remember continues. We build, we preserve, we dream. The whisper that began in Alexandria still echoes in every data stream, in every magnetic hum. We cannot help ourselves. To be human is to resist forgetting. And yet, the whisper changes tone. It begins to ask another question, one that trembles quietly beneath all our achievements. If we have preserved everything, what happens to forgetting? The next Library of Alexandria may burn without flame, only obsolescence. The hum of the digital age feels eternal, yet beneath its steady rhythm lies a quiet truth. Even light can fade. We imagine our data, our photos, our words, our history suspended forever in the invisible sky of the internet. But permanence is a myth, and the digital world is more fragile than it appears. The old libraries perished by fire and flood. Ours may vanish through silence, erased not by destruction, but by forgetting how to read what we ourselves have written. The story of loss no longer begins in smoke. It begins with a blinking cursor. Every file, every image, every thought that we upload into the cloud depends on a chain of fragile things. Electricity, software, compatibility, human memory. When any one link breaks, the record falters. Formats become obsolete. Code languages die. A hard drive sleeps too long and wakes to find itself unreadable. Even the most advanced archives, those vaults of silicon and frost, are haunted by entropy. The servers that hum beneath mountains must be replaced every few years. The data they hold must be constantly rewritten, refreshed, translated into newer forms. Without that ceaseless labor, our age of immortality could vanish in an instant, leaving behind a silence more complete than any library's ashes. Digital amnesia is not sudden. It arrives quietly, like dusk. Think of the floppy disks once filled with work, the CD-ROMs that promised permanence, the social networks that captured the daily pulse of a generation gone now, or unreadable, their languages extinct. The archaeologists of the future will not unearth scrolls or stone tablets, but corrupted files and ghosted drives. Our history will exist as fragments of code, flickering like faint stars, their light delayed, their meaning uncertain. And perhaps that is fitting. Every civilization believes its method of remembering is eternal. The Egyptians carved eternity in stone. The scholars of Alexandria wrote on papyrus. The monks of Europe copied words onto vellum. The scribes of Timbuktu inked their faith into leather. We too believe we have conquered time by turning memory into data, by entrusting our souls to circuits. But every medium bears within it the seed of its own decay. Silicon corrodes, light dims. The cloud dissolves. The irony is profound. We have built machines to remember everything, and yet meaning slips through our fingers faster than ever. We scroll endlessly through images, each preserved perfectly, each forgotten instantly. The world remembers too much and understands too little. It is a kind of blindness, a saturation of vision so complete that nothing can truly be seen. Our ancestors feared oblivion. We now fear silence. But both, in the end, are the same thing. The return of mystery. The old destruction was visible flames consuming scrolls, soldiers breaking doors, empires collapsing into smoke. Ours is invisible. No one will watch as a century's worth of memory quietly corrupts, bit by bit in forgotten servers. No monument will mark its passing. The new Alexandria will not burn, it will simply stop responding. Yet even this fragility holds a strange beauty. The digital age, for all its precision, mirrors the vulnerability of the human mind. Our memories, too, degrade. We forget names, lose details, rewrite our pasts without meaning to. In that sense, our machines are only reflecting us faithful imitations of impermanence. They remind us, in their quiet failures, that knowledge without mortality is lifeless. Some scientists speak of data preservation in centuries, of encoding information into DNA, of sending our records into space. It is a noble dream to outlive ourselves through code. But perhaps, in chasing permanence, we have misunderstood what it means to remember. To remember is not merely to store, it is to revisit, to reinterpret, to bring the past into the present with meaning. A hard drive does not remember, it only retains. Memory without reflection is not remembrance, it is hoarding. Consider this. Somewhere deep in the Arctic, a hard disk hums in cold darkness, containing a perfect copy of human knowledge. It sits in silence, untouched, flawless. If no one ever reads it, does it still preserve meaning? The question echoes through every age of the library, from Alexandria to Baghdad, to Timbuktu, and now through the circuits of our own creation. Knowledge exists only when it is lived. Data, without consciousness, is nothing but frost. The fragility of our digital future is not only physical but emotional. We have outsourced our remembering to machines, trusting them to hold what our hearts cannot. Photographs replace experience, saved files replace memory. But as storage expands, intimacy shrinks. We know how to back up, but not how to feel. The flood of images, numbers, and noise has dulled our ability to listen to silence, the silence that once gave truth its shape. The Library of Alexandria was said to contain everything the world had known. Yet its loss gave birth to centuries of renewal. What, then, will the loss of our invisible library bring? Perhaps, when the servers fall quiet and the networks blink out, something ancient will return: the humility of not knowing, the awareness that mystery, not mastery, is the root of wisdom. Our ancestors built temples to gods they could not see. We build temples to data we cannot grasp. In both cases, the act is the same, an attempt to make sense of the infinite. But while they found faith in uncertainty, we have built a machine to chase it away. And still, uncertainty waits. Already, digital historians speak of the black hole of the early internet. Decades of lost data, vanished forever. The future, it seems, has already begun to forget us. The first libraries of the digital world are as endangered as the papyrus scrolls of Alexandria once were. We are watching, in slow motion, the birth and death of a new kind of impermanence, one written in light instead of ink. It may be that future civilizations, looking back, will find only fragments, broken code, half-recovered transmissions, names without meaning. They will wonder who we were, just as we wonder about those who came before us. And maybe, just maybe, they will feel the same awe we do, that even in decay there is dignity. For what endures is not the content, but the effort. The dream of preservation is itself the most human of instincts, the refusal to let silence win. Somewhere tonight, beneath the hum of cooling systems and the flicker of LED lights, the next Alexandria breathes. Its walls are made of fireproof alloys, its floors vibrate with electricity. Inside, a billion stories wait patient, precise, unread. But the real miracle is not in what is stored, it is in the longing that built it. The same longing that drove a boy to collect scrolls on a Mediterranean shore, a scholar to copy texts in Baghdad, a family to bury manuscripts in the sand. Every archive, no matter how advanced, begins with that same fragile impulse, the desire to keep something from disappearing. And yet, perhaps, it is disappearance that saves us. Without loss, there can be no renewal. Without forgetting, there can be no wonder. The Library of Alexandria burned and gave birth to centuries of seeking. The House of Wisdom drowned, and new worlds of thought arose. The manuscripts of Timbuktu slept beneath sand until they were ready to be found again. So too will our archives someday fall silent, waiting for rediscovery. The future will not remember us for how much we saved, but for how we searched. What defines us is not the perfection of our records, but the persistence of our curiosity. The digital age, with all its shimmering fragility, is only another turn of the ancient circle: creation, loss, remembrance, return. And so, the hum continues steady, fragile, eternal for now. But every hum, no matter how constant, fades eventually into silence. And in that silence, humanity listens again, as it always has, for the whisper that began this endless journey, the question of why we hide, why we protect, and why we cannot stop trying to outlive ourselves. Every secret begins as an act of care. Long before kingdoms rose or temples touched the sky, before there were laws or gods or names for power, there was the instinct to hide. It began in the mind, that quiet corner where thought first learned to protect itself. To conceal was not deceit, but survival. The first humans, fragile and exposed beneath endless sky, learned that safety depended not only on strength, but on silence. What was hidden could not be taken. What was unseen could not be destroyed. Imagine a campfire flickering in the Paleolithic dark. The group gathers close, their faces painted in gold and shadow. Somewhere beyond the glow, another tribe watches, hungry, curious, unknown. The humans by the fire do not speak of the cave where they keep food, nor of the route they travel at dawn. They guard those truths as fiercely as their flames. Hiding was not a moral choice then. It was instinct, the first wall between chaos and belonging. From that moment on, secrecy became a quiet architecture of survival. The first hunters concealed tracks. The first healers hid their recipes in whispers and ritual. The first storytellers wove allegory around knowledge that could not yet be spoken aloud. Even the first gods were hidden, invoked through mystery, approached through silence. Secrecy, in every age, was not the enemy of truth. It was the cradle of it. As humanity grew, hiding evolved from instinct to culture. What once protected the body began to protect the mind. In early societies, mystery became the language of order. Priests held sacred words that common tongues could not utter. Kings carried bloodlines shielded by myth. The act of hiding gave power its form. What was secret was sacred, and what was sacred could command. Behind veils and hierarchies, humanity built meaning. To reveal everything they believed was to invite collapse. Knowledge unguarded was chaos. Truth unveiled was dangerous. The divine, they said, must always be cloaked, for light too bright destroys sight. In that belief lay a strange kind of wisdom. The temples of Egypt were not only monuments to gods but fortresses of mystery. Only the initiated could enter their inner chambers. What waited there was not treasure, but silence, the assurance that some truths were too delicate to be handled by all. In time, secrecy slipped from temples into hearts. We began to hide not only what we worshipped, but what we felt. Love, shame, grief, each found its own shadowed chamber. To confess was to risk vulnerability. To conceal was to survive. Even in friendship, even in love, the instinct endured. Every glance withheld, every unspoken thought, every unsent letter, all were echoes of that ancient defense. To hide, we discovered, is also to define. What we withhold becomes the shape of who we are. In the modern world, secrecy has not vanished. It has only changed its tools. We no longer whisper rituals to the gods, we type passwords into machines. The temple has become digital, the priesthood replaced by encryption. Every click, every code, every lock is a silent act of faith, a belief that some part of us must remain unseen. We shield our messages behind screens, protect our memories in clouds, disguise our fears in curated fragments of identity. Even in an age of exposure, we keep secrets perhaps more than ever. Why? Because secrecy, at its core, is not deceit but boundary. It is the line between the self and the world. To live entirely exposed is to dissolve. Transparency, for all its virtue, strips away the small sanctuaries of the soul. The human mind needs corners, places where thought can grow in darkness before it faces the light. In those corners, reflection ripens. Meaning takes shape. Without them, we become performers, always visible, never whole. It is easy to mistake secrecy for corruption, to imagine that all that hides must hide something wrong. But this is not so. The seed grows best in the soil, not the Sunday. The mind, too, needs its shade. When we protect our private selves, we preserve the space where imagination and conscience meet, where we can question, grieve, and dream without witness. Secrecy, then, is not a refusal to be honest. It is a way to be sincere. Throughout history, this instinct has saved more than lives. It has saved meaning. When faith was outlawed, believers met in secret. When knowledge was banned, scholars wrote under pseudonyms. When language was censored, poets spoke in metaphor. The hidden became the last refuge of truth. In every age, the forbidden has been the heartbeat of freedom. To conceal what must endure, that is the oldest form of resistance. But secrecy is also tenderness. A mother hides her child's fear with a lullaby. A friend conceals another's shame with silence. Lovers guard each other's vulnerabilities as if they were relics. These small kindnesses, these merciful concealments remind us that not all truth must be spoken to be understood. Sometimes, the gentlest form of truth is protection. To hide, then, is not to deceive but to preserve. It is the space between what we are and what the world can bear to see. It is the pause before revelation, the breath before confession, the silence that gives language its shape. Every secret, from the code of a spy to the private sorrow of a child, carries the same pulse. The will to remain whole in a world that divides. Perhaps This is why secrecy endures, even when there is nothing left to fear. It is woven into identity itself. The self, after all, is a secret known only in fragments, glimpsed even by its owner through shifting mirrors. We are never entirely revealed, even to ourselves. Beneath the masks we wear for love, work, belief, or survival, something always remains untouched, a small, inviolate center. That center is the source of mystery, the quiet truth that we exist not in full light, but in gentle shadow. In that shadow, there is peace. To hide is to rest from performance, to step out of the glare of explanation. It is to return, for a moment, to the cave where our ancestors first sat before the fire, guarding what they could not afford to lose. The instinct that once kept us alive now keeps us human. So when we speak of secrecy, we are not speaking of sin or shame, but of structure. Every heart holds its private archive, a library of thoughts unspoken, guarded by the same reverence once reserved for gods. These hidden chambers are not prisons, they are sanctuaries. Without them, the soul would scatter, the self dissolve into noise. Every civilization mirrors this instinct. Nations, like people, keep secrets to protect what they are not ready to reveal, to maintain coherence, to survive complexity. The archives locked behind walls, the classified files marked with ink, these are the public faces of the same ancient impulse. Humanity hides not because it is wicked, but because it is fragile. And so, secrecy endures not as deception, but as devotion. To keep something hidden is to acknowledge its worth. Every password, every closed door, every guarded thought carries the same quiet message. This matters enough to protect. Every secret begins as an act of care. And in that care, we glimpse the continuity of what it means to be alive, to hold something unseen, to cherish what cannot be shared, to remain, at least in part, unknown. From here, the whisper expands. The personal instinct to hide becomes the foundation of societies, religions, and empires. What began as protection will soon become power, and the hidden will begin to rule the visible. Nothing stays buried, not even the lies that built empires. Every civilization believes it can outlast the truth. Kings decree silence. Priests lock away forbidden texts. Governments classify and conceal, yet history is not an obedient servant. It keeps its own ledgers written not in ink, but in echoes. Beneath every monument lies a whisper, beneath every archive a pulse. What we hide does not disappear. It waits. The weight of the hidden presses through time like a heartbeat beneath stone. Its rhythm is slow, patient, and inevitable. Centuries may pass before it breaks the surface, but when it does so gently through a letter found in an attic, a buried tablet unearthed by rain, a confession written by trembling hands. Every revelation begins as a tremor, then grows into a quiet reckoning. The truth, it seems, does not demand vengeance. It simply insists on being known. Empires have always built themselves upon silence. The Romans burned records of their failures. The Inquisition erased heresies by fire. Colonizers rewrote the histories of those they conquered, leaving only fragments for the future to decipher. Yet no amount of censorship, destruction, or denial can erase completely. The evidence of what was done and what was denied survives in the soil, in the bones, in the stories that refuse to die. Even the ruins bear witness. When archaeologists brush dust from ancient inscriptions, they are not just uncovering stone, they are undoing intention. Every buried tablet was meant to stay forgotten. Every sealed tomb, every erased name, was an attempt to command memory itself. But the earth does not obey commands. It listens, and it remembers. Time, in its own way, is the truest archivist. The same pattern appears in every era. Concealment, decay, rediscovery, renewal. A regime collapses, and its archives are opened. A revolution ends, and testimonies spill forth. Soldiers, priests, bureaucrats, each leaves behind traces they once believed were gone. The letters of emperors, the journals of spies, the diaries of ordinary citizens all resurface eventually, bearing witness to both cruelty and courage. History, when it exhales, fills the air with ghosts. And yet, what emerges is rarely what the hidden once feared. Exposure is not annihilation, it is transformation. The truth, when finally spoken, does not destroy the world, it remakes it. The people who discover it may weep, rage, or despair, but in the end, they see more clearly. To know is to begin to heal. What was hidden festers. What is revealed breathes. Consider the long corridors of modern archives, the places where history sleeps under lock and code. There are rooms filled with files that have not been opened for 50, 100, 200 years. Reports sealed under national security. Letters marked classified. Whole chapters of the human story withheld from the living. Yet even those sealed vaults have expiration dates. Sooner or later, a signature fades, a rule lapses, and the pages emerge. The world reads them with trembling fingers, half afraid of what it already suspects. And the reaction, almost always, is recognition. Because secrets are rarely alien, they are extensions of our own capacity for denial. When truth returns, it does not accuse, it mirrors. It shows us what we chose not to see. It reminds us that concealment is never absolute, that silence is only a pause in the conversation between past and present. Still, the weight of the hidden is not only historical, it is emotional collective, a pressure that gathers across generations. A nation that hides too much begins to carry its unspoken guilt like a sickness. The more it denies, the heavier it becomes. Myths grow brittle under the strain of contradiction. Eventually, something cracks, a protest, a document leak, a moment of collective courage. The revelation arrives, not to destroy, but to release. The hidden does not seek revenge, it seeks equilibrium. In every age, confession becomes the turning point. The act of revealing, whether by accident or choice, frees more than the individual. It lightens the air around them. A whistleblower speaks, a historian publishes, a letter is read aloud after death. These are the modern forms of ritual cleansing. They echo the ancient practice of offering sacrifices at dawn, a way to purify what was tainted by secrecy. In Revelation, humanity returns to balance. And yet, every confession births a new concealment. The cycle continues, eternal and human. Once the truth is spoken, it must be managed. The light, too bright, must be dimmed again to protect the eyes. The story reshapes itself in gentler tones, tragedy softened into policy, cruelty renamed as necessity. History rarely heals completely. It rearranges its wounds into lessons. But even that is grace of a kind. For each retelling allows the past to breathe without collapsing the present. Think of the great rediscoveries, the Gnostic Gospels found in a desert jar, the Dead Sea Scrolls unrolled after centuries of silence, the archives of fallen regimes pried open by trembling hands. Each moment of exposure reveals not only what was hidden, but how deeply we still long to understand. Even when the truths are painful, even when they shatter old certainties, we return to them again and again because we sense that the world feels lighter when it stops pretending. The earth itself is a patient accomplice in this ritual. Every buried city, every collapsed temple, every drowned ruin holds stories that wait for us to listen. Ashes, bones, broken glass, all become languages of truth. The past does not need permission to speak. It will find its way through cracks in walls, through the lips of descendants, through dreams. The hidden is never content with silence. But why, then, do we keep hiding? Perhaps because secrecy, as we have learned, is not purely evil. It is a form of care for the living, for the fragile, for what is not yet ready to be seen. The problem begins when care turns to control, when the hidden is used not to protect, but to dominate. Power, when unchecked, forgets that truth cannot be owned. It can only be delayed. Even now, in our age of exposure, the old rhythm continues. The digital world is no different from the stone one. Files vanish into encryption. Evidence hides in algorithms. The modern empire of information, like every empire before it, will one day face its reckoning. What is suppressed will reappear. What is denied will be archived in plain sight. The cycle of concealment and revelation will begin again, not because humanity fails to learn, but because the act of learning depends on rediscovery. To live, it seems, is to bury and unearth in equal measure. We are archaeologists of our own conscience, digging through layers of silence in search of meaning. Every generation inherits not only the treasures of the past, but its omissions. We spend our lives excavating what our ancestors left unsaid, uncovering truths that make us both smaller and freer. And in this endless rhythm lies a strange mercy. The weight of the hidden is heavy, yes, but it is also what gives history depth. Without secrecy, revelation would have no power. Without loss, remembrance would have no grace. The world does not move from darkness to light. In a straight line, it breathes between them, endlessly, beautifully, imperfectly. When the truth finally surfaces, it rarely roars. It whispers. It returns not with thunder, but with calm, like a tide reclaiming the shore. The hidden rises, the burden lifts, and the silence exhales. What was once unbearable becomes, at last, bearable. And so the story continues. Every sealed vault, every unspoken word, every private grief becomes part of the earth's slow confession. What we bury today, the future will unearth tomorrow, not to judge, but to understand. The weight of the hidden is the weight of being human, the tension between what we conceal and what we are brave enough to reveal. Perhaps this is what redemption truly means, not absolution, but acknowledgement. To face what was buried, to name it gently, to let it breathe again. The world grows lighter, with every truth allowed to rise. And as we approach the end of this journey, the final turning of the circle, we return to the rhythm that has carried us since the first fire was lit. Concealment and revelation, silence and remembrance, loss and renewal. The whisper that began in Alexandria still moves through every vault, every archive, every human heart. It tells us what every age must learn anew. Nothing stays buried forever. The unknown is not a threat, it is the last sacred thing. There was a time when humanity feared mystery, when darkness was something to be conquered, measured, or named. But the deeper we've dug into the world, the more we've discovered that wonder never ends. It only hides behind new questions. The universe does not run out of secrets. It creates them. And perhaps, as the ages have shown, that is what keeps us alive. When we look up at the stars, we are staring into the oldest secret of all light, older than civilization, older even than memory. Every constellation we trace is a story we invented to make infinity bearable. The Greeks saw hunters and monsters. The Egyptians saw gods sailing in boats of fire. Yet beyond those imagined shapes lies a silence we cannot reach, a distance too vast for words. The stars do not answer, they only endure. And in that quiet endurance, humanity has always found peace. For thousands of years, the unknown was the mother of belief. We shaped gods from thunder and time, from wind and silence. The first temples were built not to explain the world, but to honor what could not be explained. Mystery was a kind of mercy proof that existence still held something beyond reach. Every unanswered question, every sacred veil, reminded us that the world was larger than our understanding, and that humility was the price of belonging. But somewhere along the path of progress, mystery became suspect. We began to treat the unknown not as wonder, but as failure. Knowledge turned into conquest. We mapped every sea, measured every sky, dissected the living world until only data remained. Yet even as we did, the old hunger remained, that ache for something immeasurable, something no telescope or algorithm could contain. For all our clarity, the heart still longs for fog. The ruins remind us of this. Across deserts and jungles lie fragments of civilizations whose names we barely pronounce. Stones that outlasted their makers, carved with meanings no one remembers. We send satellites and scholars, scanning, decoding, classifying, but the silence of those ruins persists, serene and undefeated. It is not ignorance that moves us when we stand before them. It is reverence. The unknown within them feels alive, almost protective, as if some truths were never meant to survive translation. There is beauty in not knowing. To live without certainty is not to live without meaning, it is to live with depth. The painter does not explain the color blue. The musician does not name the silence between notes. Some things exist to be felt, not defined. The same is true of mystery. When we stop trying to solve it, it begins to speak in gentler ways, through intuition, through awe, through the small shiver that runs down the spine when we realize how little we truly see. Perhaps that is why every civilization eventually turns back toward wonder. The Egyptians looked to the stars and called them gates to eternity. The mystics of Sumer listened to wind as if it carried divine breath. The monks of medieval Europe illuminated manuscripts not to preserve truth but to decorate its silence. Even now, in an age of equations and simulations, We build observatories and particle colliders, cathedrals of curiosity, where scientists kneel before the same question that haunted the ancients. What lies beyond? The answer, perhaps, is not meant to come. The unknown endures because it must. Without it, imagination would wither. Without wonder, knowledge would lose its purpose. Every mystery we solve leads only to deeper ones. Every discovery, a door opening onto another corridor. This is not failure, it is design. The unknown is not the absence of knowledge, but its horizon. It gives direction to our search, weight to our humility, meaning to our existence. Consider the night sky again. If every secret of the cosmos were revealed, if every equation were complete, every mystery explained, would the stars still move us? Or would they become another solved problem, stripped of their poetry? Mystery gives life its pulse. It keeps us leaning forward, listening. The silence between the known and the unknowable is the rhythm of awe itself. There is a strange kind of faith hidden in this acceptance. Not the faith of doctrine or decree, but the quiet belief that uncertainty has value, that some truths protect us by remaining veiled. The ancients understood this better than we do. They left their temples unfinished, their myths ambiguous, their gods unknowable, not because they lacked skill, but because they knew perfection is the death of wonder. What remains incomplete invites reverence. Modern life, flooded with answers, leaves little room for reverence. We are surrounded by information, yet rarely touched by understanding. We seek explanations as if they were oxygen, terrified of the spaces where certainty fails. But the unknown does not threaten us, it frees us. It reminds us that not everything must be mastered. It invites us to listen rather than dissect, to feel rather than prove. In surrendering the need to know, we rediscover the humility that built the first fires of thought. Even science, the great heir to curiosity, whispers this truth in its own way. For every solved equation, a deeper enigma emerges. For every mapped particle, a deeper field hums unseen. The universe expands faster than our minds can follow, as if it too desires to remain partially hidden. The more we discover, the more we sense the edges of something infinite, not a barrier, but a promise. The unknown is not our opponent, it is our companion, our teacher, our final mystery. So much of human history has been a struggle against the dark. Yet here, at the end of the long arc of civilization, the dark no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like home. The shadows beneath the waves, the silence between stars, the ruins half buried in sand, they remind us of our own incompleteness, our own fragility, our own beauty. To exist at all, in a universe that owes us nothing, is already a miracle. To wonder at it is the purest form of gratitude. And perhaps that is what all our libraries, temples, and archives have been striving toward, not the accumulation of answers, but the preservation of awe. Every scroll written, every monument built, every whispered myth was an attempt to touch what could not be grasped. The Library of Alexandria, the House of Wisdom, the hidden manuscripts of Timbuktu, all were mirrors held up to the same truth, that knowledge without mystery is a body without breath. The unknown keeps us human. It draws us toward humility, toward connection, toward the quiet reverence that no machine can replicate. It is the thread between past and future, the silence that carries every age's final question, not what is real, but what remains beyond us. And as the story nears its close, the whisper returns soft, persistent, familiar. The same whisper that once echoed through Alexandria's marble halls and Baghdad's shadowed libraries now hums within the circuitry of our own age. It reminds us that even as knowledge grows, mystery grows beside it, eternal, patient, kind. For in the end, the beauty of the unknown is not that it hides from us, but that it stays waiting to be wondered at, again and again, by those who dare to listen. And so the whisper continues not to alarm, but to remind. It begins where it once began, on the shore of Alexandria, where the sea meets the ruins and the wind still carries the scent of forgotten ink. The waves rise and fall against stones older than memory, their rhythm unchanged by empire or time. Once, this harbour was the heart of the world's wisdom ships, docking with scrolls, scholars walking beneath marble colonnades, the lighthouse burning like a second Sunday. Now, there is only water, soft and endless, and beneath it, silence. Yet that silence is not empty. It hums with remembrance. The story of the library has never been one of endings, only of returns. Every civilization that sought to know everything has eventually met the same truth, that knowledge is fragile, that memory burns, that wisdom survives only through rebirth. What was built in papyrus became parchment, then paper, then light upon screens. What was lost in fire reappeared in whispers, translations, and dreams. Humanity's greatest archive has always been itself, the mind that forgets and remembers in equal measure. The sea here seems to understand. It covers what was destroyed not in malice, but in mercy. The drowned columns, the scattered statues, the sand-covered stones, they rest now beneath the waves, untouched by history's noise. If the library could speak, perhaps it would not lament its loss. Perhaps it would sigh, relieved, knowing that every age must one day be released from its own illusion of permanence. The tide takes what it must, and in doing so, it makes space for new beginnings. From the ashes of Alexandria came Baghdad's house of wisdom. From Baghdad's ashes rose the scholars of Cordoba, the libraries of Timbuktu, the monasteries of Europe, the presses of Gutenberg. Each one believed itself the heir of the last, unaware that it too would one day fade into myth. The pattern is not punishment, it is rhythm, the heartbeat of civilization. Knowledge lives by being destroyed and rebuilt. Forgetting, too, is a form of creation. The narrator's voice drifts gently, as if tracing that rhythm across centuries. We built the library to contain the world, but the world was never meant to be contained. Each attempt to hold all truth ends in the same realization, that the infinite cannot be archived. What we seek to preserve will someday escape us. What we think we have lost will return in forms we do not recognize. The circle of remembering and forgetting keeps turning, endlessly, patiently, beautifully. Imagine, for a moment, standing in that ancient hall once more. The marble floors glow faintly in the lamplight. Dust floats like stars in still air. Somewhere, a scribe bends over a scroll, the tip of his reed pen trembling as he copies a line that may outlive him. He does not know that his work will vanish in fire. He only knows that it matters now, this act of preserving, this quiet defiance of time. Across ages, that gesture repeats itself in 1,000 forms. A monk tracing letters on vellum, a mother telling stories by candlelight, a scientist pressing save on a screen glowing in the dark. Each one continues the same vow, to remember, even knowing that forgetting will come. And perhaps that is what makes the human story beautiful. Not that we endure, but that we try. We build knowing the waves will come. We write knowing the pages will fade. We search knowing the answers will slip away. The tragedy of loss and the miracle of persistence are one and the same. What is gone gives meaning to what remains. In the quiet that follows, the narration softens into reflection. Maybe the library was never meant to last forever. Maybe it existed to teach us how to begin again. The dream of Alexandria, that all knowledge could be gathered in one place, was always impossible. But impossibility is what gives the dream its purity. The pursuit, not the possession, is what defines us. Every age must chase its own version of the impossible, building new temples to understanding, knowing they too will fall. The waves at Alexandria have seen all of it. The rise of marble, the fall of fire, the shimmer of light on oil and glass. They erase without cruelty. They remember without judgment. The sea, in its endless motion, holds the same lesson the library once did. That wisdom is not about permanence, but participation. We are not meant to keep the flame, only to pass it. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the faint sound of turning pages carried by the wind, not from books, but from time itself. Each gust lifts fragments of memory and lets them drift, sentences half remembered, ideas reawakened, questions never answered. Somewhere, a child looks at the stars and wonders what they are. Somewhere else, an old scholar rereads a line of Plato and hears it differently than before. The library has not vanished. It has become invisible, dispersed among us. Every mind that questions, every heart that seeks meaning, is a fragment of its resurrection. Even now, in the glow of digital screens, the same ritual continues. We archive our thoughts in clouds instead of papyrus, build servers instead of shelves. Our libraries hum with light instead of flame. Yet the essence is unchanged. We gather, we preserve, we hope. We trust that someone, someday, will look back and understand. Perhaps they will, perhaps they won't. The act itself is enough. For all our progress, we remain bound by the same truth that guided Alexandria's keepers, that knowledge is both our greatest gift and our most delicate illusion. It connects us across time, but it also reminds us how small we are. We are custodians, not owners. What we call discovery is only rediscovery. What we call loss is only transformation. The library's story is not about a building or its destruction, but about the persistence of longing, the eternal desire to know, to preserve, to believe that our thoughts can outlive us. In the distance, the lighthouse once known as Pharos is gone. Its light extinguished centuries ago, but its image, a tower of fire guiding travellers through fog, still burns in the imagination. We have built countless versions of it since: radio towers, satellites, digital networks. Each one shines the same message into the dark, that we are still here, still reaching, still listening for the whisper that began beside the sea. And so the circle closes, not in despair but in peace. The story that began with curiosity ends with acceptance. What was sought has not been found, but it has been honoured. The library's dream, like the waves of its harbour, remains eternal because it never needed completion. To search is to live, to lose is to remember, to rebuild is to love. Now, the voice fades, and the sea becomes louder, soft, endless, forgiving. The listener feels the weight of centuries settle into calm. The fires have cooled, the dust has fallen, the ink has dried. The circle of knowledge, once burning and bright, now glows like an ember in the night. Humanity has learned, once more, what it always knew: that truth is not a destination, but a motion, a pulse moving through time, gentle and unending. Perhaps that is what the library wished to teach, in its final silence: that every answer we find will one day become another question, that every ending is a beginning we have yet to understand, that the whisper continues not to haunt, but to remind. The story rests now, not concluded but complete. The tide rolls in, carrying the murmur of history. Somewhere below, the ruins of Alexandria sleep, still dreaming, still alive in the deep. The sea folds them into itself, as the narrator's voice softens to a close. What was written will fade, what was forgotten will return, and through it all, the world will keep turning, not to end the story, but to begin it again. The waves echo like pages turning. The whisper fades into the rhythm of the tide. The circle, at last, closes calm, eternal, whole. Perhaps the greatest secret is that we were never meant to know everything. In the hush that follows centuries of seeking, a new kind of silence appears, not the silence of loss, but of completion. The waves that cradle Alexandria's ruins move as they always have, washing over what once was the greatest collection of knowledge the ancient world had ever seen. The stones do not mourn, they breathe. They have accepted what we, in our restless minds, still resist, that some questions exist only to remind us of wonder. For ages, we have called ignorance a wound. We have built empires, machines, and philosophies to close it. Yet the more we learn, the wider the horizon grows. The universe stretches outward like an endless library, its shelves receding faster than we can walk. The scrolls multiply beyond number. Even as we gather fragments, a star's death recorded in light, a buried inscription half remembered, the whole remains forever beyond our reach. And maybe that is mercy. To know everything would be to end the story. Mystery is the rhythm that keeps existence alive. Every question is a heartbeat, every answer, a pause before the next pulse begins. The unknown is not the enemy of truth, it is its shadow, its guardian. It keeps knowledge from hardening into arrogance, from turning still and final. Without uncertainty, wisdom would wither into certainty, and certainty, left too long, becomes blindness. Imagine the library again, its shelves towering, its scrolls breathing the dust of centuries. Scholars once walked those halls believing they could contain the world, every poem, every law, every dream recorded for eternity. But perhaps the library's destruction was not a failure of preservation, but an act of balance. The flames did not end knowledge, they transformed it. The ashes carried it into the air, scattering it across lands and minds. The loss became a spreading the unknown, reshaping the known. The ruins of Alexandria are not a grave. They are a reminder. Every blank page, every missing fragment, every word burned away by time, is a space left open, an invitation for the imagination to breathe. The gaps in history are where our stories grow. If everything were remembered, there would be no room for discovery, no need for faith, no reason for art. Perfection would silence us. It is incompleteness that keeps us speaking. Look upward to the stars that have watched us rise and fall. Their light, travelling for millennia, arrives as a message half faded by distance. We do not see them as they are, but as they were. Even the cosmos hides itself behind time. What we gaze upon is memory, light delayed, secrets preserved by distance. The sky is an archive we can never fully read. And yet, knowing this, we still look up, still wonder. Not because we expect answers, but because the act of wondering itself is holy. There are truths that must remain unnamed to stay beautiful. The way the tide forgets each wave but never loses its rhythm. The way a face in a fresco fades just enough to become universal. The way a question lingers after the voice that asked it is gone. These are the mysteries that make existence bearable, the soft, forgiving spaces where certainty dissolves and meaning blooms. Perhaps that is what the ancient scribes understood as they wrote by candlelight, that no library, no empire, no monument could hold eternity. So they wrote anyway, knowing their words would crumble. Each stroke of ink was an offering, not to posterity, but to presence, the quiet joy of shaping thought before it disappears. What they left behind was not a record of certainty, but a gesture of faith. The same is true of us. We, too, build archives, record data, chase discoveries. We, too, believe that if we collect enough, understand enough, preserve enough, we will finally grasp the whole. Yet the more we gather, the more we realize how vast the gaps between things truly are. Our maps of knowledge resemble the night sky dots of brightness floating in an infinite dark. And perhaps that is the most graceful image of all. Not a universe conquered, but one forever unfolding. To rest within that unknowing is not to surrender, it is to trust. To accept that mystery does not mock us, but includes us. We are part of the question, not its answer. The very act of being alive to breathe, to wonder, to listen, is participation in a story too large to finish. The wind moves through the ruins now. The harbour glows with twilight. The lighthouse of Pharos is long gone, but its idea still burns in every small act of curiosity. A child reading beneath a dim lamp. A scientist waiting for a signal from a distant star. A poet writing a line that may never be read. They are all continuing what Alexandria began, not the collection of all knowledge, but the celebration of its mystery. We speak often of enlightenment, as if the goal were to banish darkness entirely. But what if the light's purpose was never to erase shadow, only to teach us how to see within it? The unknown, like night, is not absence. It is depth. It holds the stars, the dreams, the quiet spaces where thought turns to reflection. Without it, there would be no contrast, no wonder, no peace. In the ruins of every library, in the silence of every unanswered question, something gentle waits. It asks not to be solved, but to be noticed. It is the same quiet voice that hums in the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the tides. It whispers, "You are part of the mystery, not apart from it." The narrator's voice softens, almost like a lullaby now. The story has wandered far through fire and sea, through ink and light, and returns here to rest. The library's dream was never to conquer ignorance, but to coexist with it, to honor what can be known while revering what cannot, to stand before the vastness and feel no fear, only awe. The missing scrolls, the forgotten names, the questions that hang unanswered across centuries, they are not failures of history. They are its balance. Without them, there would be no wonder left, no reason to keep asking, listening, dreaming. The unknown keeps the story alive. It gives us a reason to look outward and inward and onward. And so the waves continue their slow rhythm against the Alexandrian shore. The stars shimmer, patient and ancient. Somewhere beneath them, the ruins sleep, holding their silence like a prayer. What we'll never know is not a wound. It is the soul of the world breathing. Perhaps the library was right to burn. Perhaps every age must lose something precious to remember what knowing is for. Not control, not power, but reverence. The sea sighs, the night deepens, the voice fades to stillness. There are no conclusions now, only continuations, the quiet promise that mystery will outlive us, and in doing so, will keep us whole. The whisper lingers. You were never meant to know everything, only to keep wondering. The unknown is not darkness, it is depth. For as long as humans have looked upward, they have mistaken vastness for emptiness. The night sky was once feared a void scattered with unreachable fires, a realm of cold silence. But to those who learned to listen, that silence was never empty. It was alive with patterns, with meanings that whispered just beyond the edge of comprehension. The same impulse that once made the ancients trace gods across the stars still moves in us now, though our gods have changed their names. What they called the divine, we call the unknown. To wonder is to pray without words. It is an act older than language, the body leaning toward mystery. Every civilization has done this, in its own way. The Egyptians built temples aligned with the sun, trusting its shadow to reveal truths they could not speak. The Greeks carved philosophy into stone, seeking order in chaos. The scholars of Alexandria gathered the world's words beneath one roof, believing that to name was to preserve. Even now, in the glow of our screens, we perform the same ritual typing questions into machines that do not sleep, hoping they might answer what still eludes us. The forms have changed, but the hunger remains. It lives in the pulse of every question, in the quiet ache behind invention. From ink to code, from parchment to pixel, we keep building new ways to reach the unreachable. Yet what we chase is not merely knowledge, it is communion. To stand before something vast and unknowable is to feel both small and infinite at once. It humbles and enlarges us. In the same breath, the unknown has never been an absence. It is a presence that waits patient, luminous, endlessly unfolding. It does not hide from us, it invites us. It reveals itself in fragments, in echoes, in coincidences that feel too perfect to be chance. It is the reason a scientist keeps searching after failure, the reason a poet writes a final line and feels it isn't final at all. The unknown keeps art alive, faith awake, curiosity unbroken. Without it, we would have no reason to look up, to listen, to dream. The Library of Alexandria was born from this same longing, a yearning not just to collect knowledge, but to touch the mystery that knowledge points toward. Every scroll it held was an attempt to translate wonder into words, to trap the shimmer of the infinite within the fragile skin of papyrus. And when it burned, it did not end that quest. The flames merely changed its form. What could not be preserved in ink survived in spirit. The impulse to seek, to understand, to believe that beneath the surface of what is known, something greater still breathes. Even now, that same spirit hums beneath the world's noise. It lives in the algorithms that predict our desires, in the networks that bind our voices across continents. We have built new temples of data, new archives of thought, and though they may seem mechanical, beneath their hum lies the same old question, the one that built the library, the one that burned it, the one that has never stopped asking, what lies beyond what we can see? The unknown gives meaning to the known. Without it, discovery would lose its sweetness. Certainty would feel like a cage. Mystery is what gives truth its depth, like darkness that makes light visible. It is not the enemy of reason, but its companion. Every theory ends with a margin of wonder. Every law of nature hums with unanswered questions. The universe, in its perfection, leaves room for poetry. There is grace in that. To accept what we cannot know is to enter harmony with time itself, to stop demanding completion and start hearing the music of uncertainty. The unknown asks nothing of us but reverence. It does not need to be solved, only seen. Its beauty lies in its endurance, that even after centuries of search, it remains untouched, infinite, whole. And so, the narrator's voice softens, almost as if speaking a benediction. The beauty of the unknown is not that it hides from us, but that it continues to meet us in every question, every shadow, every new beginning. The same wonder that once filled the halls of Alexandria now flickers in a billion quiet minds, staring at glowing screens, tracing light across the void. We are still the same species of seekers, still listening for the whisper that moves between stars and words alike. The unknown is not darkness. It is depth, the gentle pulse beneath existence, the silence that makes the song. To stand before it is to remember who we are, not conquerors of truth but its companions. We are not meant to reach the end of understanding, only to walk beside it, in awe, as it unfolds forever. The waves of Alexandria rise and fall. The stars above shimmer, patient and unchanged. Somewhere between them, the story rests unfinished, eternal, alive. The story sleeps now, but the whisper does not. It lingers softer than the tide, lighter than the dust that settles over forgotten pages. Across centuries, across silence, it continues to breathe. The voice that began among the marble halls of Alexandria drifts now through wires and waves, through the glow of midnight screens. The forms have changed, but the rhythm remains the same. To know, to lose, to seek again. The candle that once flickered beside a scribe's trembling hand still burns, not in temples or towers, but in the quiet space between thought and dream. It burns in you, the listener, as curiosity, as wonder, as the faint ache of wanting to understand. That is where the library truly lives. Not beneath the sea or within the archives of the world, but in every question that refuses to fade. The narrator's tone slows to a breath, almost indistinguishable from the hush of waves. The sea outside Alexandria glows faintly beneath the moon, its ripples catching silver light. Far beneath the surface, the ruins rest unmoving, undisturbed, yet their silence hums. It is not a silence of absence, but of presence. The kind that watches, that waits, that remembers without words. Listen closely, and you might hear it. The sound of paper turning somewhere in the dark, the hum of a server far away, the wind moving through an open window. Every age leaves behind its own kind of murmur. Papyrus became parchment, parchment became ink became light, and through it all, the whisper stayed the same. The world reminding itself that mystery is not something to solve, but something to honor. All things return. The flame of Alexandria flickers again in the smallest gestures, in a hand reaching for a book, in a thought that pauses before sleep, in the moment before a question is spoken. Knowledge and mystery fold together like breath and heartbeat. The more we learn, the more we are reminded of what cannot be learned. And that balance, fragile and eternal, is what keeps the light alive. The narrator's voice fades to stillness. The listener is left with only sound, the low hum of the world at rest. Waves against stone, the faint scratch of quills that no longer exist. The pulse of a machine recording the memory of silence. Somewhere, a page turns again. Somewhere, the question begins anew. The library breathes through us, as it always has a flame passed from age to age, unchanged by time, unbroken by loss. The story ends, but the seeking does not. The circle closes calm, luminous, complete. And in that stillness, the whisper remains.